Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto becomes bounty hunter to survive in Konoha part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. I was in hell. Or at least I thought I was, when I finally reached the mental acuity necessary to process visual information. It was a reasonable assumption to make, as I was surrounded by crude huts made out of stone and wood, all of which were ablaze. Thick clouds of smoke clogged the air just above me, so I wouldn't know if there was a night sky with stars or the craggy roof of an enormous cave. I felt scalding heat on my skin, and there was screaming too, a lot of it. No doubt the screams of the damned. I could see motionless bodies all around me, many smoldering, and I could smell the familiar stench of the dead and dying. Yep, must be hell. They didn't have a whole lot of fire at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, and I vividly remembered my death. Remembered the beeps on my radar, the thunderous crash as the torpedo hit, throwing us out of our chairs and shattering the bulbs over our heads. Remembered how we were cast into unforgiving darkness until the dim, flickering emergency lights kicked on and bathed everything in muted red. Remembered my own silent horror reflecting on the faces of every crewmate in the control room as we felt the vessel we entrusted our lives to groan underfoot. Then, reality sank in, and we all blitzed into frantic action. I had ordered my crew to surface as quickly as possible. Decompression sickness was the least of our concerns. I regret those orders now. Implosion would have granted us a quick death. We rose just high enough to avoid catastrophic failure, but not high enough to have any hope at reaching the surface. Instead, freezing water began to rush in. I had always adored the ocean, and I think I still do. But feeling it slowly climb up my skin, inch by inch, felt like the ultimate betrayal. Finally, my beloved Indy, the USS Indianapolis, my pride and joy, ripped in half, and I along with my beloved crew were sucked out into the freezing ocean. Dark, but for the glimmering, golden sun above. Tauntingly out of reach. Salt water seared my lungs as they filled against my will. I was too numb to thrash, and it would accomplish nothing anyway. My vision darkened around the edges, and my last thoughts were the first prayer I'd made in years. Maybe if I had been more devout, and not an instrument of pointless war, I wouldn't have wound up here. God damn it, wait, should I say that here? Maybe I should try and get on the big man's good side. Ah, screw it. I was already in hell, and I'm pretty sure the damned don't get let out early on good behavior. By God, it was loud. Both from the screaming and from the crash of fire-ravaged buildings as they collapsed. I tried to get up, but found that my legs couldn't support me. I could barely even manage to position them under myself. Annoyed and panicked, I tried to at least cover my ears, but I didn't have the strength to lift my arms either. There was a body near me, belonging to a woman that might have once had dark hair, though now it was almost all burned away along with her scalp and the entirety of her back. I could tell she had frantically rolled on the dirt road, trying in vain to put it out, something I thought should have worked. The fires of hell must be unnaturally fierce, however, because she died with her face twisted in agony and desperation. How can a person die in hell? Was she double dead? Did she get sent to turbo hell? If she redeemed herself during her time here, would she go to heaven? Or did PEMDAS happen and she got sent up one level to purgatory? I hope she ended up someplace better than here. For some reason, I felt some kinship with her. Like she was important. But I had no idea why. The strangest thing about the woman was how giant she was. If she stood, my eyes would have only matched up to her knee, if that. As I surveyed my surroundings, I realized that I must have been sent to giant hell by mistake, because everything appeared to be scaled up. The doors on the houses, the metal braziers alongside the road, which were, ironically, the only things not on fire, and even the brain goat headbutting a wooden fence in a frantic attempt to escape were all massive. Goats in hell. Huh. I had seen the devil portrayed as a goat in movies, so maybe that wasn't so strange. A tendril of smoke made it into my airways, and I coughed. And kept coughing, the sound strangely high-pitched to my own ears. Breaths came shallower and shallower, my throat burned, and I tasted blood as my ravaged throat turned raw. It was awful, and I tried to rein in the involuntary reaction. Tucking my chin and clenching all the muscles in my neck, I attempted to build up saliva in my mouth for lubrication. I must have been severely dehydrated, because it took a long time. Furious with myself and my circumstances, I scowled into the blazing village. Hell needed someone to upgrade their infrastructure. This shithole looked like it was built in the Dark Ages. Maybe if I see a demon soon, I could make a bargain. I'm no civil engineer, but I have some basic mechanical knowledge I was forced to pick up in the Navy, and I knew how to make asphalt. Even Hell's inhuman punishers must be able to see value in paved roads. I might even see one of Hell's keepers now. The only living, conscious thing I've encountered yet, slowly creeping towards me. It was hard to see from this distance, but I could tell from his body language that he was rather shell-shocked. Not a demon, then? A survivor? I had seen such behavior before, most notably when I had made port the first and only time in Latvian waters. Riga had suffered terrible air raids, but we needed to make repairs, and the survivors would do anything to pay back at their aggressors, even at their own continued risk. As they led us through bombed-out residentials and shattered ruins of what they might have considered skyscrapers, I saw this same numb look of incomprehension on their faces, as if they couldn't so much as process the atrocity leveled against them. But as the person, a boy, he might have been a giant, but his face was clearly young, drew nearer, I could tell that he was different. He was uninjured, for one, and his clothes were nice, if a little strange. A flowy red tunic? That he was all but swimming and covered up most of his figure. The left sleeve was loose and long, but the right was missing altogether, revealing a bare, toned arm carrying some sort of knife. A soldier, then, I realized. Green, almost literally. He looks like he's about to puke. He's lucky he made it to the battlefield so late. But why were there soldiers in hell? Was the underworld going through some sort of civil war? If so, I might just find an interesting way to spend my eternal damnation after all. Hey! I tried to call out, but the sound came out unintelligible and was overtaken by more wet, racking coughs. Not wanting his first impression to be of me choking, I quickly smothered them as the cloying taste of iron coated my tongue. But the sound had captured his attention. Taicho? He called out shakily. You need to see this. Another giant came into view, this one much older. He had a full beard, a brown bandana with a metal plate, and an outfit that almost matched the kid's. Only, he had what appeared to be a brown combat vest over the red garment. Since his right sleeve was also missing, I could tell he was incredibly buff, and not with stunt muscles either. He had the same build as Sir, my father, minus the gut I'd always known him to have. A child? He rumbled, and the illusion was broken. I'd never met anyone in my life who had a voice like that. It was low and melodic. It sounded like how cigarettes taste. Then my brain processed his words. Child? I looked down, and found my fingers to be disproportioned and pudgy. I tried to make a fist, scarcely believing my eyes, but my fingers were slow to respond. So I wasn't in hell for giants. I had been de-aged. Or reborn entirely? Why isn't it crying? A girl looking to be the same age as the first boy, who was all but clinging to her superior's metaphorical skirts, asked. I would have taken offense at the selected pronoun, but I likely would have used the exact same phrasing in her place. Is he even alive? The boy echoed. Okay, it was permissible, but he? I would have said something just to fuck with him, though I wasn't sure my tongue had the dexterity to manage such a feat, but it didn't matter, because if I unclenched my throat muscles even slightly, I'd be thrown into another coughing fit regardless. Instead, I blinked lazily at him. So creepy, the girl whispered. Again, fair play. It's just sitting there, in Siza. Isn't it scared of the fire? Cammy, it's right next to its mother's corpse. Oh, was that my mother? I looked back at the burned woman. She did seem to be reaching out towards me, with desperation fixed by rigor upon her face. That explained the sense of familiarity I felt. Even though I didn't know the woman, I couldn't help but feel a little sad. I hadn't had a mother in my past life. I guess the streak continues. She's a baby, their leader said, and I internally thanked him for his observational skills. Babies aren't known for their ability to think. I'd bet he would be a great singer. She's still an Earth Country citizen. We'll take her with us, and any other survivors we find if they can be transported. As he surveyed the burning remains of the village, his face was a mask of fury. Those Konoha bastards. Iwagakure will never forget this. Wait. What? Asano Kazuhiro had lost more than he ever thought he could. His parents were both shinobi, career chunin as he was himself. Only they were among the first casualties in the Second Shinobi World War, and he continued to stumble his way through battlefield after battlefield, surviving more so than fighting. Like almost all of his class, he hadn't passed the rigorous graduation exam in the academy, and thus didn't get assigned to a team with a Jonin sensei. Instead, he was tossed into the cesspool that was the Genin Corps to die taking a kunai in the place of more valuable shinobi. It was a miracle that pulled him out of what was a dead end for most, earning him a field promotion for striking a killing blow on a ranked enemy he could never hope to match without the corpses of his entire squadron behind him. With his parents and peers in the ground, he had only one important person left. His godfather, Imai Hisashi, had not exactly raised him, as he was a jonin and far too busy with the war. But he had done what he could for Kazuhiro, whether that be taking him out to eat, keeping him company at the monument to the fallen, and even teaching him jutsu. Then, Hisashi had lost his arm, and Kazuhiro had been disgusted with himself for how ecstatic that had made him. A shinobi who couldn't form hand signs was all but useless on the battlefront, where mid to long-range ninjutsu reigned supreme, so he had been forced into an early retirement. After a fashion. The Sandaime Tsuchikage had stationed him in Fugatoro, a small village well behind their line, as a middling defense between the lands of grass and earth. Now, Kazuhiro was able to visit him much more frequently, as he barely had to alter his course to pass through Fugatoro on his way back from the courier missions he almost exclusively seemed to be sent on nowadays. Hisashi's injury had initially sent the man into a depression, but after a year he slowly began to come to peace with it. No doubt his new wife had something to do with that. Amori Mana was in much the same position, though Hisashi had confided to him that her career-ending injury had been internal. Kazuhiro had never felt comfortable inquiring further, even though both of them had insisted, despite their lack of shared blood, that they were all family. One that would have a new addition soon, as Mana became pregnant by the time Kazuhiro had gotten the chance to meet her. That would have gotten most kunoichi in serious trouble, so Kazuhiro kept it a secret, despite never asking his godfather if it truly needed to be. They might have gotten permission for all he knew. With Mana's disability, this might have been the best way she could contribute to the future of Iwagakure. It didn't matter in the end because, on his return trip to Iwagakure with messages from the front, he found Fugatoro burned to the ground, with 4 genin barely out of the academy digging mass graves. What happened here? He asked hoarsely as one softened the earth with a jutsu, seemingly not proficient enough to fully excavate the dirt. Leaf attack, a girl said shortly, a pitying glance given as she correctly interpreted his loss. Our contingent was caught off guard and overwhelmed by the strike force. Any survivors? He whispered numbly. Some, the girl said, and a spark of hope ignited within him. They've all been taken back to IWA. Without another word, he took off in a dead sprint. Nagai Sunio stepped into a room filled with scrubs and lab coats, and left a completely different person. It was a cruel and depressing irony that the Henji no Jutsu, transformation technique, was his most commonly used jutsu these days, surpassing even his medical techniques. Any witnesses might have assumed that Sunio was an infiltrator, and would have attempted to either kill him or rat him out to someone who could. However, a spy or traitor he was not. He was supposed to be here, in this hospital, henge and all. The deception was a necessary step to hide the fact that Megaki Sho only had one medic nin, him. The rest were false identities, created at Lord Tsuchikage's behest and regarded as an A-rank secret. Iwagakure wasn't like Konoha, which seemed to have enough medic nin to staff every unit in their damned forces. Even Sunio, who was the hospital's director, didn't know the real number, but he had trained half of them and doubted IWA had more than 80 in total. All of which, aside from him, were stationed near the front lines. It was an unsustainable and dangerous practice, and Sunio dreaded the almost inevitable day they would lose even more, and he was sent out as well. He just knew that would be the same day some disaster struck the village itself, and there would be no one left to pick up the pieces. He at least took solace in being spared from the war front. Then the war front came to him, and he got a first-hand taste of the nightmare his colleagues faced daily. Late last night, he was roused from his cot to attend to an influx of burn victims from a now obliterated village to the south of Iwagakure. Only 5 had survived the night, and 4 remained in critical condition. He hadn't tried his hardest to save them, as their chances would remain slim no matter what he attempted. Conserving his chakra, both to heal others and maintain the illusion, was more of a priority than chasing miracles. Goya-sensa, a voice called out, breaking him from his reverie. He turned his head to see a panting nurse, if she could be called that. The girl was only 13, and Sunio doubted she would last another month in his hospital. Very few ever did. Yes? He snapped. There's a man here, inquiring about the child. Ah, yes. The child. A relative? He questioned. Possibly, she said quickly. We're not sure yet, with all the confusion. He is asking to see her to be certain. Excellent. I was just heading to the burn unit now. Bring him there, he instructed. A minute later, he was running diagnostics over the melted face of a middle-aged man he was keeping in a chakra-induced coma, when the door opened noisily. The nurse, he couldn't recall if he had ever bothered to learn her name, led in a young man in a chunin vest, eyes red-rimmed and shoulders slumped with grief. Please apply Salve B6 to this patient's burns, he told her, and she scampered off to obey his directives as he turned his attention to the new arrival. Good afternoon, Sunio said softly, adopting a tone more appropriate to the circumstances. The visitor gave a short, bitter laugh. No. No, it's not. Sunio nodded, sympathetically. It's not, he agreed. I'm sorry for your loss. I heard you might have ties to one of our patients. Maybe, the youth said roughly, swaying on his feet. My godfather and his wife were murdered in the attack. His wife was due around a month ago, while I was away on an extended assignment. I was on my way to meet my god-sibling when. He trailed off with a shuddering breath, and Sueno wasn't cruel enough to make him finish. We don't have any identification, he told the boy. The ones who received her at this facility kept her original garments, but none of them are especially unique. You're more than welcome to see them, if you think it might help. He shook his head. Can I just see her? Sunio nodded, gently guiding him towards the back corner of the room. While the other beds were closely crammed together, separated by pipe and white drapes that smelled strongly of bleach, this incubator sat apart with as much space as possible between it and the rest. Inside, the newborn lay so perfectly still that, if not for the steady blip of the heart monitor, Sunio would have thought she was dead. On her face was a tiny breathing mask hooked up to a crinkled tube. She escaped the fire itself, but she must have inhaled some smoke. SIDS is not out of the question, he warned. Fortunately, she has responded well to my medical ninjutsu, and I've cleared out her lungs. But there is already internal scarring, and it's too risky and not urgent enough to try and fix it at this stage. Her voice will likely never develop properly. I'm not certain I care yet, the young man responded, and Sunio couldn't blame him for the bluntness. If he had suffered such a loss, and if it wasn't his job, he probably wouldn't care about a random infant either. Do you see any defining similarities? He asked, knowing it didn't really matter. As a medic nin, he knew better than most that the brain would show a person whatever similarities or dissimilarities they wanted to see. If the young man wanted to take the kid, he would, and if he didn't, he wouldn't. Then, the child's eyes snapped open, a perfectly ordinary brown, and the young man sighed. She's Hisashi's. She has his eyes. Sunio, if he weren't a better shinobi, would have sighed in relief. He was well acquainted with the orphanage matron, and he knew what dire straits the facility was in. No pleasant future would await the child there. Excellent. In that case? He prompted. I owe it to my godfather to care for her, but I don't know if I have the means, the boy said. I'm not even sure they'll wait for tomorrow to reassign me. Were her parents shinobi? Sunio asked, receiving a nod in response. I have the authority to write birth certificates. I'm certain no one who matters would take issue with me officially recognizing her surname despite not being present for her birth, making her the heir to her parents' accounts. Shinobi wages were delivered through a centralized bank, which meant each of them were required to have accounts. If the young man was lucky, they'd have some funds saved up to help provide for their daughter. It will be a simple matter for you to adopt her, giving you full access to them. Taking into account Iwa's current priorities, the process wasn't nearly as thorough as it ought to have been. And regarding your reassignment, he glanced down at the patch on the boy's vest. 7th Division, and a courier. In other words, he was little more than a body, as far as IWA was concerned. Yes, will of stone and all that. Every piece had its time. But as things currently stood, he was little more than fodder on the battlefield. Unfortunately, I do believe you've come down with a case of chakra poisoning, he stated. I apologize, but given the current occupancy of this hospital and your rank, I cannot authorize the use of medical chakra to clear out your pathways. It will take a month to resolve naturally. During that time, I must insist that you stay within the village to rest, and you are forbidden from any usage of chakra until you have fully recovered. I'm sorry, but my verdict is final, and a report will find its way to your commander's desk. I thank you? Thank you, Sensei. I have done nothing for which you should be thankful for, Sunio said smoothly. We are each doing our solemn duty to IWA and her future. On that note, I need to collect some information in order to draft her birth certificate. He pulled out a pencil and pad of paper. Father? Imai Hisashi, he said, voice thick. Mother? Amori Mana. Date of birth, well. She's clearly only a month old, so we'll say April 16th. How does that sound? He received a nod of agreement. Then finally, we need a name. Did your godfather share any prospective names with you? No, was the short response. Then you must decide on one. It was unfair to force the young man to name a human on the spot. Parents would agonize for months or even years over the task, but there wasn't much of an alternative. It seemed, however, that the child's new guardian had an idea. As he looked up from the ground, Sunio could see the hatred in his eyes. Kasai. Ki, he whispered, visibly shuddering in fury as the name left his lips. Kasaiki. She who will burn forests to the ground. The wildfire. The destroyer. Her name gave Sunio goosebumps. Are you sure that's the future you want for her? He attempted. A name is a powerful thing. I do not say this as a reproach or with judgment. But people may treat her differently. She deserves to be treated differently, the young man said stiffly. She is the daughter of 2 disabled and retired jonin, murdered just 1 month after her birth by Konoha shinobi. Kasaiki is her past and her future. Sunio sighed heavily, because in the end it was never his choice. Kasaiki, then, the medic Nin finally murmured, writing down the 3 kanji. And the last name, you said, was Imai? He nodded. It will certainly turn heads. All the while, said child stared at them with a frankly unnatural level of comprehension. She remained entirely motionless as always, but for the occasional lazy blink. Imai Kasaiki was, unfortunately, not the first or even second baby he had treated for smoke inhalation. But she was the first to live. The others had cried their heads off, choking on their own blood until their tiny lungs collapsed. But Kasaiki never made a peep, even after he rinsed her entire respiratory system out with a delicate application of Sueton. He knew from people with the ability to speak that the process was incredibly uncomfortable, but all this child did was clench her fists. See me for a checkup in a month's time, he said to the oddity's new guardian. Regarding your case of chakra poisoning. Some symptoms you might experience are shortness of breath, bouts of dizziness, fatigue, or pain in one or more of the gates. Everyone heals at a different rate, and it is possible you might need more time than I projected to fully recover. His gaze flitted back to the incubator. Imai-chan will have to stay for a couple more days. Use that time to secure her adoption and purchase the necessary supplies. Stop by the front desk, and we can share some literature with you. Now, if you'll excuse me. Goya-sensei had to make a house call. And while he was away, Higa-sensei had more work to do. If anyone noticed that they, along with the other 4 medic nin attending Megaki show, were never in the same room together, they had the good sense to keep their mouths shut. The Land of Frost wasn't nearly as inhospitable as its name suggested, which should have been obvious to anyone possessing the ability to read a basic map. It was right next to the Land of Hot Springs, after all, the country known for its year-long summers. The Land of Frost was mostly named after the snow-capped mountains that ran up the coast and deep into the Land of Lightning, and after the early morning dew that froze into intricate patterns before being melted away by the midday sun. Right at Kumogakure's doorstep, the country had been heavily occupied for the duration of the Second Shinobi World War by foreign powers. Now, at a particularly unassuming inlet off the western coast, it would host a most unusual meeting that would change the course of the elemental nations forever. I feel I should be insulted, the much larger of the assembled duo growled, baring teeth filed into points. He had auburn hair styled into 2 buns, possessed green, triangular markings along his cheeks and carried a sword as impressively massive as he was on his back, secured with leather straps and bound in blood-stained bandages. And why is that? The far more normal-looking of the 2 asked, trying not to stare at the tiny skull on its pommel. He could have sworn it had just wriggled. We are at the Reikage doorstep, and yet he sends a child to speak on his behalf. It speaks more to the Reikage trust in me than any disrespect towards you, Kenshi-san, he quickly assured the powerful shinobi. I may be younger than you, but I am a jonin, and the Reikage's personal attendant and advisor. I already act on his behalf much of the time, and with a topic as urgent as this, I am the only one who can negotiate in his stead while he fights on the front lines. The giant scoffed, but his body language grew a touch less hostile. Fine then. Where's the other one? How should I know? I don't need to worry, a new voice cut in, and they both looked up to see a woman hovering above them, arms splayed to each side. Hoisting her into the air were hundreds of wasps, and though there were so many of them, neither of the others could so much as hear a trace of buzzing from insects' wing beats. The Sandane was most curious about the subject of this meeting, the woman stated as the insects deposited her to the ground. The Kumo delegate nearly shuddered as the creatures all wormed their way under the hems of her garments. So I pray you will not waste my time. Kamizura Kimiko, the giant man identified, giving a satisfied nod. That's more like it. Fuguki Suikazan, she returned, not deigning to offer the Reikage's assistant more than a dismissive glance. He struggled to keep himself from rolling his eyes. The woman would probably try to kill him, and he wasn't quite sure he could stop her. You're bigger in person, she deadpanned. How anyone expects me to believe that you are the greatest stealth specialist in the elemental nations with that bulk, I'll never know. The swordsman's eyes flashed at the challenge, and the Kumo Jonin decided to cut in before a fight broke out. We'd best begin our discussion, he said quickly. The Reikage would like to propose a temporary alliance, centered around the fulfillment of a certain goal. A certain goal? The Kamizura clan heir mused. One certain goal? One goal, but not a simple one, he claimed. Iwagakure, Kirigakure, Kumogakure. We are all mighty, but still we are forced to the outskirts of the continent. Meanwhile, the Central East, some of the most fertile and wealthy land in the elemental nations, is controlled by an alliance consisting of Takigakure, Kusugakure, and of course, Konoha. Their armies are mainly contending with Suna for now, though I believe they are acting out against IWA as well. Is that correct, Kamizura-san? Don't ask questions you already know the answer to, she said, unimpressed. Of course. Well, Konoha will win against Suna. The Sandmen put up a better fight than we expected, but their defeat was always a foregone conclusion. However, it gives us an opportunity, one to finally crack the lock they have over this region. It's not something Kumo can do alone. Kiri has stayed out of this war, so far, the giant said. It suits us to grow in strength as our rivals weaken one another. Oh, but Kiri is the hidden village that stands to gain the most from this venture, the Kumo delegate proclaimed, and the giant regarded him for a moment before waving his hand testily. Spit it out then, he rumbled. I have no patience for these games. We have discovered that there is one unifying link between these allied countries, the delegate revealed. You both know it well, I'm sure. A not-so-little island off the eastern coast of the Land of Fire. Right between it and Kiri, as a matter of fact. Yuzushio, the giant identified immediately. They've been a pain in our asses for decades. Why would Kumo or IWA care about it? Because their export, seals, are what unites Konoha, Taki and Kusa. And although not militarily aligned, they play a big role in Konoha's trade with the Land of Tea as well. If we can get rid of their seal masters, they will turn on one another like dogs fighting over scraps. That seems like a stretch, Kimiko stated. I should think it would be more likely for Konoha to take revenge at all costs. How could they? The Kumo representative countered. Our proposed plan is for you, IWA, to engage the Konoha army as soon as they defeat Suna, before they retreat from their western front. Kumo will rendezvous with an arm of Kiri's forces in the Land of Dreams, where they will provide us transportation over the treacherous waters surrounding Yuzu. Meanwhile, the bulk of Kiri's forces will engage them from the south, catching Yuzushio between a hammer and an anvil. Our two villages will do the dirty work of taking the village. Konoha won't have time to react, and they'll be so beaten by the end of it they won't be able to retaliate. It still seems like a lot of work for an ambiguous payout, Kimiko stated. The broken alliance is only the greatest short-term benefit, the advisor claimed. Their seals pose a great threat to us all, and have reaped devastation on each of our armies at some point in the past. All while foiling our attempts at retaliation. I don't wish to dredge up ancient history, but I'm quite certain there are specific instances that must come to both of your minds. It was never strategically advantageous to reveal to an enemy which of their misdeeds had been uncovered. They might use that information to plug holes in their security. Additionally, there are the Biju to consider, the Kumo Nin continued. The Shodame Hokage charitably gifted them to us, but do you truly think it was as a gesture of goodwill as he claimed? When the only ones who can truly control the monsters reside in Konoha and Yuzushio? The Mokuton may have been lost with the first, but they still have plenty of Uchiha, along with Uzumaki. The Jinchuriki we welcomed into the hearts of our villages are exploding tags that Konoha can detonate almost at will. Powerful assets they may be, but how long until they're turned against us? Welcomed into the hearts of our villages? Kimiko sneered. Speak for yourself. We of IWA are not so naive. Our Jinchuriki aren't allowed to set foot in the village proper for that very reason. But wouldn't you rather not worry about the issue at all? He pressed. Wouldn't you like to be able to deploy one of your greatest military assets without them being constrained and corrupted by the Uzumaki seals and adamantine chains? I see through your flowery words, the Kiri delegate spoke up. The Reikage isn't gracious enough to do the dirty work. He scoffed the words. Himself. Removing a threat isn't your sole objective. You wish to take their power for your own. Their precious sealing guides, their texts. All for Kumo. Along with some of their bloodlines as well, Kimiko said, wrinkling her nose. It certainly wouldn't be the first time. I do recognize you, by the way, Mr. Advisor. I've seen the bingo book entry of Otaki Dodai, if that is your real name. How did the lava release end up in the Land of Lightning, I wonder? It is native to IWA, as I'm sure you know. Elemental bloodlines arise on occasion as a result of random mutation, he said stiffly. I have a comrade with the magnet release as well, which had previously only been seen in Suna. Funny, she sneered. Funny how these random mutations only ever seem to pop up in Kumo. We in IWA have never benefited from a random mutation. Have any in your village, Figuki-san? None that I'm aware of, the swordsman answered. I thought not. She shifted her posture, and the Kumo nin stiffened as killing intent began to trickle out of her like melted snow from atop Frost's mountains after the first caress of the morning sun. It stung his skin, literally. He tried not to let the pain show. If you're going to plunder Yuzu, leaving us to shoulder the burden of distracting Konoha and all of their outrageous clans, then we will get some of the reward. Kiri as well, the other cut in. It's called the Whirling Tides for a reason. Do you think you can navigate the seas yourselves? Dodai sighed. This is something our esteemed Kage will have to hash out amongst themselves, I believe. Aside from that minor objection, what are your thoughts? The Mizukuge may be interested, the Kiri nin responded after a moment's thought. As you said, Yuzushio has been a thorn in our side for decades. I will relay the message to Lord Tsuchikage, Kimiko allowed. After recent events, he wants his pound of flesh from Konoha. Thank the Kami. Lord Reikage eagerly awaits their formal replies, Dodai said, too good to let his relief show. That he got out of this alive, much less with a maybe, was more than he could have possibly hoped for going into this meeting. Status. It was nighttime, and the hospital, or this room at least, was still and silent. But there was a window that let in just enough moonlight for me to see my reflection staring back at me from the domed, glassed interior of my incubator. Status. Still nothing. Maybe I did have to say it out loud. I tried to force the sounds out, but my tongue was pudgy, sluggish, and difficult to move. Tada, I choked out, the mask over my face stifling what little volume I could manage. My throat felt tight. The doctor had said something about scarring. I'd probably sound like an old smoker for the rest of this life. I was called mouthy a lot in my last one, so maybe this was yet another cruel trick of the fates. Just like being reborn in the Naruto universe and not being stuck in Kiri, or at least Konoha. God, I would have loved Kiri. I adored the ocean, and the ocean usually adored me. With chakra, I could have made the water do terrible and amazing things. I would have even preferred Suna to IWA. Desert it may be, but wind was half of what made the ocean the ocean. And I'd have to look at a map to be positive, but I believe Suna has direct access to a southern sea. IWA has a coast, but it borders a polar sea, and I'm significantly less fond of cold water, especially after my death. SCSCZ, ta. Dzzz, I tried to enunciate. Damn S's. Still, there was nothing militaristic, cruel Iwagakure I could do. War, even from my limited perspective, I could easily tell that one was going on, was nothing new to me either. Clanless orphan, I would take it in a heartbeat with no complaints. If I could just have goddamn gamer powers. But no, that would be too easy. I'm starting as a goddamn NPC, with no special abilities or inherited techniques to draw upon. I was toast. After letting myself wallow in self-pity and catastrophize for a minute, I decided to speedrun the 5 stages of grief. God, Kami? Kami, I can't believe this shit. I can't be alone and powerless in a world with giant chakra beasts and a powerful but barely developed magic system. And I can't be in fucking IWA, the village famous for both being and for losing every war. They're literally the 1900s Germany of the elemental nations. There's no fucking way I'm going to be some nobody, forced to follow orders of dumbass military squares with political agendas. Hard-headed, isn't that what IWA prides itself on being? Well, I'll show them hard-headed. I'll be the hardest chick around. Wait. Pause? Fuck it, you know what I mean. Climbing the ranks is a must, though. There's got to be someone who'll help me on that front, right? IWA wasn't exactly well fleshed out in the story, but they are willing to cooperate during the 4th Shinobi World War. Maybe they aren't as bad as the stories make them out to be. They might not be as lovey-dovey as Konoha, but I'm sure there will be an opportunity to impress someone up top and maybe get some special training. I just have to put on a good show. And IWA might lose a lot, but they're still considered one of the strongest hidden villages, powerful enough to stalemate Konoha in the Third War before the Yellow Flash showed up. I think. Yeah, and I'm used to a rigid military structure. I might be able to fit in here. Who am I kidding? There was a big difference between the US Navy and Iwagakure no fucking Sato. Even Konoha committed war crimes on the regular, and this place by all accounts was a hell of a lot worse. I'll admit I don't have the best moral compass, but there are things even I can't abide by. I won't be able to do anything about that until I'm extremely high up in the village hierarchy. And how could a no-name orphan get to that stage? The only thing they probably respect here is strength, and even if I work my ass off, how could I possibly begin to compete with the big names in this world without a bloodline? I sighed, and I could feel the warm air condensing under my mask. With hard fucking work, that's how. What use was there in despairing? I was in a Wagakure, I was an orphan, and I'm pretty sure I'm not from any fancy clan. If I was, I doubt I'd be left alone in a public hospital. There was nothing I could do right now to change any of that. But I did have some advantages: a mind advanced well beyond my peers, military experience, knowledge of the future, a rudimentary understanding of the power system, and the imagination of thousands of fanfic authors behind me. I couldn't change the circumstances of my rebirth, but I could prepare for the wars that I knew were coming. There were so many things I had to do to prepare, if I didn't want this life to be cut short just like my last one. I mean, not now, I'm only a month old, so I'm completely helpless. There's only one thing I can think of that I'm capable of right now. I closed my eyes and began to meditate. Officially adopting Imai Kaseki was as easy as the doctor said it would be. All it took was a quick visit to the citizenship office in the Internal Affairs building. The clerk was so relieved to be given a case pertaining to a citizen of Iwagakure, rather than a refugee seeking asylum that would have to undergo extensive vetting, that he shook Kazuhiro's hand after quickly stamping his approval over the documents. The next part was far harder. Despite offering Kaseki's birth certificate and freshly stamped adoption records, it took an infuriating amount of work to convince the bank manager, a slimy man with a patchy beard and a weak chin, to allow him to merge the funds in Hisashi and Mana's accounts with his own. The man might have continued to deny his request if Kazuhiro's temper hadn't uncharacteristically reached a boiling point, and he began shouting. The commotion caught the attention of another of the bank's patrons waiting in line, a jonin who was in between assignments. As Kazuhiro explained the situation, frustrated tears in his eyes, the jonin, a bearded man who looked the part, fixed his gaze on the teller. "He's telling the truth," he said shortly. "It was my team that found the girl and brought her back to IWA. If he is willing to raise her, he will be doing the village a great service. Give him the money." The smarmy man was far less confident now. "I'm sorry," he attempted, dabbing the sweat off his temples. "There are protocols in place, you see. We have to look into the request and conduct an investigation." The jonin reached out and grabbed the stone sill of the teller's window. "I'm not sure you heard me," he said as killing intent began to permeate the air, drawing curious and nervous looks from the rest of the shinobi waiting in line. "Give him the damn money." The teller swallowed. "Okay," he folded. "Yes, I will. I'll grab the form, and you just have to wait a few days for processing." There was a loud snap as the hand clenched around the sill, shattering the stone in his grip. The teller flinched at the sound, and at the crumbled pebbles that clattered onto his desk. "No delays," the jonin said. "He needs the money now. Do it, or you won't enjoy the consequences." Shakily, the teller updated the ledger, showing it to the jonin. Kazuhiro craned his neck to see, and his eyes widened at the figures. He knew it paid well to be a jonin, but damn. "Obara Naomi," the jonin said suddenly. "Arima Hideo. Tutsui Seiji. These 3 of my comrades died without heirs or beneficiaries. They would want their funds added to this young man's as well." Both Kazuhiro and the teller jerked in shock at the claim. But, the teller stammered. "He has no claim to their accounts. There's no way for me to justify to my superiors that their funds belong with him." "So where do they belong then?" the jonin asked darkly. "In your or your manager's pockets?" "No," the teller said, aghast as more judgmental eyes began to look his way. "No, we would never." "I can vouch that these men and women would rather have their unclaimed savings go to this man rather than rotting at the end of your ledger," the jonin said. "So transfer them, now." The teller did, and Kazuhiro could have suffered a stroke when the man revealed his new balance. "I don't know what to say," Kazuhiro whispered in awe to the jonin. "There is nothing to say," he claimed, the intensity of his eyes not letting up. "This money is for the girl, understood? Not for you. If I hear of my comrade's savings being squandered in a gambling hall somewhere, that Sachikage himself won't be able to save you from my retribution." "Of course not," Kazuhiro said immediately. "It will all go to her. Clothes, milker. Whatever else babies need." He hadn't had time to review the material he had been given at the hospital yet. "And when she's older, training equipment," the jonin said, and Kazuhiro nodded readily in agreement. The daughter of 2 fallen heroes deserves to follow in her parents' footsteps. Having said his piece, he turned away before seeming to take an ounce of pity on the teller. "If your superiors have a problem with this," he said, fixing the man with an impassive gaze over his shoulder, "tell them that Tsuchibukuri no Biwa insisted." A tremble of both fear and awe shot down Kazuhiro's spine as he realized that he, and more specifically the child he was now the guardian of, had caught the eye of the Tsuchikage's eldest son. Now that he had funds, Kazuhiro's first order of business wasn't to secure a crib, clothes, or even baby formula. It was to buy a house. Yes, he was technically homeless. Not that it really mattered. Kazuhiro was never in IWA much to begin with. After his parents died, leaving him with barely over a tenth of what he had gotten from Hisashi's account alone, he had been forced to sell his childhood home and almost everything in it, finding an apartment instead to stay in. He earned far less than what the property should have been worth, as buying houses was incredibly low on everyone's priority whilst at war. He was just thankful to find a realtor who would purchase it at all. As the conflict ramped up, and he spent less and less time in the village, he decided it was time to cut his biggest and most unnecessary expense. So he stopped paying rent, and allowed himself to be evicted without a fight. The few nights he was inside the village, he would stay in its cheapest and shittiest hostel, which was a hell of a lot more affordable. But with Kaseki in the picture, he needed a more permanent residence. And with his bank account heavier than he could have ever possibly imagined, he went house hunting. It would probably be prudent to pick somewhere close to one of the daycares, he mused. He couldn't stay out of active duty forever, and babies required a lot of attention. Luckily, this was an incredibly common problem in IWA, and the village provided free services to shinobi parents in their absence. Free services weren't exactly known for their quality or effectiveness, however, especially with tensions inside the village being so high. He was worried that, if his house was a bit too inconvenient to reach, they might be late, or otherwise reluctant to properly care for Kaseki. It wasn't something he would have even considered if not for the fact that many kunoichi in his academy class had been drafted into the service, and he recalled hearing them complain about it. Utterly overwhelmed, Kazuhiro let out a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a sob, leaning against the corner of a storefront, and covering his eyes with a forearm. He didn't know what the fuck he was doing. He didn't know what he didn't know. And he didn't want to be a parent. All he wanted to do right now was cry, and rage, and maybe return to the front to kill a couple of leaf scum or die trying. But he owed it to Hisashi to take care of his newborn godsister, so he forced himself together and pressed on. His feet finally led him to a street he knew very well. He blinked out of his daze the moment a familiar house came into view, one that filled the few criteria he had. It was only 3 blocks down from the daycare, and there wasn't too much space to maintain. He knew for a fact there were only 2 bedrooms and a single bathroom. It also had a shower and high fences to prevent snooping. Additionally, it just so happened to be his childhood home. He wasn't incredibly surprised to see a for sale sign hung up on the door. Clearly, the realtor had about as much luck flipping it for a profit as he had. It didn't take much more thought or consideration. He hunted down the owner and bought the property back, taking caustic satisfaction in the discovery that it cost less to buy it now than what he had sold it for. He was still bitter at the supposed loss in value all those years ago. On his way back, he ran into a couple brats who he offered to pay to clean the place for him while he worked to furnish his new/old home. They agreed after some haggling, and by Kami Kazuhiro was glad to finally have money. He considered this a necessary expense for Kaseki's continued well-being, since their new home was doubtlessly filthy and dust couldn't be good for a baby's tiny lungs. And didn't the doctor say she already had respiratory issues? Yes, this was incredibly necessary. He found all the pieces of furniture he required easily enough. It was all second-hand, or perhaps 11th, and he spent the better part of the day lugging it all back to his home. As soon as he deemed that the brats had done a good enough job cleaning out the dust and cobwebs, he paid them and went to meet his neighbors. Not out of any desire for community, but out of hope that they would be parents willing to help him out in a pinch. He got the feeling that he would be running into quite a few of those. At the house across the street from his own, he struck gold. "Kazu-kun!" a matronly lady exclaimed the moment she laid eyes on him. "My goodness, how long has it been?" It took him an awkward amount of time to remember her name. "Hamamoto-san," he greeted. "It is very nice to see you again." "Oh, call me Akaneo-san," she insisted, even though they had never been that close before he moved. Pointing that out would only hurt his cause, so he embraced the familiarity with open arms. "Akaneo-san," he acquiesced with a strained smile. "It's been too long. After the deaths of my parents, I was forced to sell our home to make ends meet. I beg your forgiveness for not bidding you a proper farewell. I was so distraught." "There is nothing to forgive," she said firmly. "You were so young, only 12. I can only imagine what that must have been like for you. It was not easy, he said, which was a massive understatement. But a shinobi is one who endures. It's in the name. Hamamoto-san clucked disapprovingly. But shinobi are human, I should know. I birthed one of them. Thank Kami. He had never known that Hamamoto-san had children. Given the woman's age, they were likely older than he was by a considerable margin. If they were still alive, he wouldn't ask in case they weren't. That conversation wasn't one he thought he could bear at the moment. On the topic of birth, he said, my godfather, I'm not sure if you ever met Imai Hisashi. He and his wife were killed by Leaf Nin, leaving behind a newborn daughter. Neither of us have any family to turn to, so I adopted her. Adopted? The woman spluttered. But you're only 16. There was no other option, he said, doing his best to push down his anger. Yeah, he was 16. And no, he wasn't ready. He didn't know if he ever would be. But that wasn't the point. I understand your concerns. Believe me, I feel them too. But I'm sure even this 16-year-old can give a child a better life than she would receive in the orphanage, and I owe it to her father to try. Hamamoto-san drew a sharp inhale, but Kazuhiro soldiered on. But I can't do this alone. He drew a ragged breath before kneeling before her despite her protests. I beg of you. Could you please help me through this? Because he choked. I just lost the only person I had left. And I don't know what to do. Though he wasn't proud of it, he had intended to take the manipulative approach, and in a way he still was. But it seemed as if the day had caught up to him. The act dissolved, and all he could be was sincere. Kazu-kun, no. Kazuhiro-kun, she said, laying a wrinkled hand on his cheek. Raise your head. Please. He didn't, because tears were running down his chin and each one of them weighed a ton. Hamamoto-san sighed. This war has taken so much from so many. You have my greatest respect for your sacrifice, and my greatest admiration for adopting that child. Of course I will help you, as much as I can. Thank you? From the bottom of my heart, thank you. He tried to pull himself together, and found the task nearly impossible. But he could fake it, for Kasaiki's sake. Yorishiku Anagai Shimesu, Akane Obasan-sensei, he joked, and took the slight chuckle he got as a victory. Fanfics led me to believe that normal humans who transmigrated to the elemental nations would automatically be cognizant of their own chakra, as the energy was so foreign that it couldn't help but stand out, sometimes to the point that it caused mild to intense discomfort. That, apparently, would be too convenient. Chakra was elusive. So elusive that, if it hadn't been iterated time and time again that chakra existed in all things living and non-living in this world, I would have given up searching. However, as an infant, I had nothing but time. I would have had no idea where to begin if not for the good doctor. When he cleared out my lungs, an experience I would do my damnedest to avoid repeating, let me assure you, he used what I assumed to be medical chakra. I'm not sure if this is canon or fanon, but I remember something about bodies rejecting foreign chakra, and that medical jutsu worked by molding the caster's chakra into something that the patient's body could accept. The explanation seemed in line with what I experienced. All I could feel in the process was the water as it swirled inside me. Herc. Just thinking of it made me nauseous. But then, 2 days later, he used another jutsu on me, one that likely had roots in medicine but didn't use medical chakra. And oh boy, that I could feel. The sensation was indescribable, and not necessarily in a good way. But even after it receded, drawing itself out of my body the same way it came in, a feeling of emptiness lanced through the affected areas as if the chakra carved grooves in my very being. Grooves that were naturally filled in an instant later with my own chakra felt better. It moved through what I knew to be its own circulatory system, filling the empty grooves and soothing them like aloe gel over a sunburn. As soon as my chakra settled into what I assumed was equilibrium, I lost the feeling. Gain, I chirped unthinkingly, and the doctor froze. Ah, crap. Babies don't speak. I didn't necessarily want to follow the stay under the radar philosophy that many FIC protagonists abided by, but this was a bit much. If Konoha had Danzo and Root, IWA certainly had something worse. I've never heard a peep out of you before, he murmured, and I would have slapped a hand over my forehead if I had the arm strength and didn't know my dome was, at the moment, dangerously squishy. Babies don't speak. Why would he assume I said anything intelligible? Did my chakra disturb you, perhaps? He wondered. No, wait. I can't make him afraid to try that on me again. Give me those grooves, Doc. I gave him my best, cute baby almost giggle, and though it was embarrassing, it seemed to do the trick. What a strange child, he murmured. Reaching out, he did what I assumed was a hand seal, I'm not weak enough to know which one, and touched a finger to my opposite elbow. Boom, instant grooves. My chakra rushed in to fill the voids, and I let the feeling roll through me like a freshwater stream. No, that picture was too calm. It was like an ocean, dashing its waves against the cliff face. Once it was filled, the tide began to settle into something calming once more. I didn't want that. I was no calm sea, I was a tempest, a hurricane. Something that I could feel, not something that would fade away into the background. If I lost this, and the doctor didn't see fit to give me another groove, how would I find my chakra again? Despite it being inside of me, I barely had any more control over this ocean than I did over a real one. But that didn't stop me from kicking my metaphorical feet and splashing around as much as I could. For all of 2 seconds before a massive hand pressed itself against my side. "Don't do that," he snapped, and the military brat in me recognized an order from a superior officer when I heard one. I stopped splashing immediately, to his visible surprise. He stared at me with an intensity that I had never yet suffered in this form, and a twinge of unease passed through me. Was Mr. Doctor a censor too? "Did you do that on purpose?" he asked, and I wouldn't have answered even if it wasn't rhetorical. "I'm just a widow baby, I don't understand words." He shook his head in bewilderment, stepping back a bit. He looked like he was caught between wanting to pace and wanting to be within arm's reach to stop me from having fun. Well, there's a first. A newborn unconsciously using chakra. Hey, fuck off. It was totally conscious. What would I even call it if she died? He softly wondered. Sudden autonomous infantile chakra ejection? Drainage? Maybe perforation, if the pathways rupture. Perhaps I shouldn't be messing with my chakra just yet. Breaking out of his morbid thoughts, he placed his hand back over my chest and resumed channeling what I recognized to be medical chakra. Instantly, my ocean smoothed out, becoming tranquil as the coasts of the Maldives. I grudgingly refrained from putting up a fight. "I'll need to tell the kid when he returns to keep an eye out for this," he muttered, fixing me with another perplexed stare. "The symptoms, not the cause. I don't see any good coming out of breathing a word of this to anyone. You're going to be a very scary lady one day, kid." Ah, beans. Yeah, I couldn't fly under the radar if I wanted to. A month old and I was already making, waves. Approximately an hour and a half later, my boredom once again became intolerable. I blame it on growing up with the internet. Just a little nudge wouldn't kill me, right? The hurricane left an impression, but I could feel its memory fade further and further from my stupid, underdeveloped baby brain with each passing second. Before it could disappear entirely, I kicked one foot, nay, a single toe, creating the slightest of ripples. In my imagination, that ripple changed form, becoming pill-shaped and elongating as a little periscope poked out of its top. Like the easily entertained child I always was, I sent it on its way, closing my eyes as I eagerly followed its voyage. The sea it explored may have been unlike any I had ever descended into, but I would conquer it like any other. And my first step towards doing so was to learn its currents. "It's nice to officially meet you," the youth in front of me said with extreme awkwardness. "I am Asano Kazuhiro, your godbrother. And I'm going to be taking care of you from here on out." I simply blinked at him. What, did he expect me to introduce myself? "You were the one who named me, dude." Try as I might, I could only pick up bits of that conversation, but that piece didn't escape me. He sighed, and placed me down in a carrier he had brought. I turned my head as much as I could manage to continue examining him. I wasn't great at guessing ages, and as an infant everyone looked huge, but even I could tell that Kazuhiro was young. Way too young to be entrusted with a child, especially an infant, for more than a couple hours. Apparently, nobody else shared that opinion. Old enough to kill, old enough to raise a kid, I guess. He had hair that someone from my original world would pay hundreds of dollars to emulate, dark blue like early dawn, though the effect was slightly ruined by the mild greasiness of late puberty. He also had freckles, grayish eyes, and a gaunt-looking face. Definitely needed a good night's sleep or 12, but given the circumstances I could grant him a pass. All in all, certainly not out of the running for anime protagonist. Too bad we didn't share genetics. Hopefully, I would turn out even wackier, in a good way. He sighed, slumping down into his seat. He was waiting for a nurse to return with documents, and likely instructions. "What am I doing?" he moaned, and I couldn't help but cringe at the despair in his voice. "It's okay, little dude," I thought. "I know you'll try your best." What a shit situation he was forced into. At that moment, I internally vowed that I would make things as easy as I could for him. It was the least I could do. I died in my early 30s and never had any interest in having a kid anyway, even in vitro. But I knew people who had, so I was all too aware of how difficult it was for two adults, never mind a single teen. "EWBO, I offered him, and his eyes widened at the noise. "That's right, he's never heard me speak before." He chuckled softly as the surprise wore out. "At least you're a cute kid. Hisashi, he would have loved you so much." Well, fuck. That made me sad, and I never knew the dude. It wasn't the nurse who returned, but a doctor. A different one than the person who tended after me in the evenings. "Bring her back for a cursory checkup every 3 days," he instructed Kazuhiro, giving him several sheets of paper. "And don't hesitate to take her in early if you believe something to be amiss. Her health is fine, but any trauma at such a young age needs to be treated with the utmost urgency. Regularly monitor her chest region, and if you sense any," he lowered his voice a touch, "chakra disturbances, bring her back immediately." "Chakra?" Kazuhiro repeated in bewilderment. "What do you mean?" The new doctor's gaze flitted over her new guardian's head, as if looking for eavesdroppers. "As you must have experienced, chakra is intrinsically tied to our emotions. I have learned of cases where an infant's chakra lashes out against its host's body, causing catastrophic internal damage. Incredibly rare, but something we must consider nonetheless. With both her parents being jonin, Kaseki-chan might have naturally larger chakra reserves, meaning there's a greater risk." The doctor was so good at lying, medic or not, he was a ninja, that I almost believed him at face value. But then I remembered the other doctor's words several nights prior. He must want Kazuhiro to watch for signs of me messing with my chakra, I realized. I thought he said he wasn't going to tell anyone about that. Perhaps the case study he described was a real thing, and he instructed this new doctor to warn Kazuhiro about it. Whatever the reason, my godbrother looked well and truly spooked by the warning. The doctor noticed as well inside. "Just remain vigilant, and there won't be a problem," he said in an approximation of reassurance. "If she begins crying, investigate. It will usually mean she is hungry or needs to be changed, but if you prod around certain areas and the crying intensifies, it might indicate she is in physical pain. Take her to the hospital immediately if that is the case. Our secretaries have been informed to fetch me or one of the other medic at once." Damn. He was really worried about me exploding myself, wasn't he? Kazuhiro nodded seriously. "She doesn't seem like much of a crier." "You can thank Kami for that," the doctor said. "I've attended to her quite a bit, so I've noticed her cues. She doesn't seem to cry when babies typically do. When she's hungry, she'll make mouth sounds. When she needs to be changed, she'll flail her arms. Other than that, she's silent. Perhaps it has something to do with the vocal scarring, and the associated difficulty of producing audible sounds. The act of crying could be too difficult for her. Though she does possess an uncommon degree of intelligence beyond that. When I make my rounds at night, she always calls for food at nearly the exact same time. As if she can regulate her own schedules according to my presence, which is notoriously rare before the 12-month mark." He had attended to me quite a bit? What a strange thing to say, because I'm fairly sure I had never seen this man before today. The same doctor checked up on me each night, and he looked nothing like this guy. But why would he lie? And with such accuracy, all of his observances were right on the money. Most of those acts he mentioned had been intentional. "That's good to know," Kazuhiro said, ducking his head in appreciation. "Thank you for all you have done for her." "Stones at the base are what makes a mountain strong," was his reply. And with that they left, and I caught my first daytime glimpse of Iwagakure. Hidden villages might have started out deserving their adjective, but that approach soon grew unrealistic. Aside from Taki, none were self-sufficient, most weren't even close, so they relied heavily on imports and exports. And if merchants couldn't find the village to trade with in the first place, then there would have been a big problem. Unlike some other villages, Konoha, Iwagakure was rather subtle. Her architecture consisted of tall, cylindrical buildings that bore conical roofs and much shorter, wider houses that were squeezed in between them. Though unconvincing up close, at a distance the phallic-shaped buildings did well to blend in with the titanic mountains that surrounded Iwa on all sides but one. Other hidden villages had man-made walls, but Iwagakure's were all natural. The village, though it was more akin to a city these days, was built in rings to better maintain the illusion. At the center was the Tsuchikage's palace, along with several other important buildings that acted as the headquarters for the village's most illustrious divisions. More and more rings had been created in the years since. An academy was created, along with Megaki-sho, shopping districts, and plenty of residential areas. From above, Iwagakure's disguise was less effective. The building's roofs blended into the ground perfectly if one were to look straight down, but approaching it from the sky brought plenty of other angles into view. And of course, any populated area would have busy streets. It had never been an issue before, though, because most shinobi who held the ability to fly came from IWA to begin with. Not that it really mattered. IWA had never been invaded. In fact, an enemy army had only breached the land of Earth's borders 3 times in their entire history. Smaller armed forces were another story. This was due to the incredible degree of battlefield control a Wagakure shinobi with a good grasp on Doton techniques possessed. Without vegetation, sand or water restricting their techniques, there was little stopping them from collapsing an enemy camp from below, hiding devastating traps or even causing avalanches. Earth jutsu may not have been as flashy as fire, lightning, wind, or even water. They were rigid, unmalleable, and stubborn. But, as many of Iwa's enemies discovered, it was incredibly difficult to fight when you couldn't even trust the ground beneath your feet. I didn't mind that Kazuhiro treated me like a junior work associate instead of a literal baby. In fact, I probably would have lost it if he spoke to me in a more age-appropriate manner. "This is the living room," he said, pulling the front door closed with a piteous screech of the hinges. The space was mostly bare, with only one seat, a wooden coffee table. Did they have coffee? Oh, I really hope they have coffee, and a mobile hanging from the ceiling. I stared up at it in bemusement. Were those shuriken? Before I could tell for sure, I was carried to the next room. "Here is my bedroom, and yours for now. There's one for you across the hall, but the pamphlets recommended you stay in the same room as me in the short term." Ah, he did his required reading. He was taking this seriously. "This is your crib," he said, showing me the structure that would be my permanent residence for the near foreseeable future. It was battered and the wood was scuffed all over, but the mattress thing over it looked brand new. He deposited me inside, and turning my head, I saw his own bed. Or rather his lack thereof. Craning my neck to the side carefully because I knew the muscles were underdeveloped, I looked down through the slats of the crib to see a plain gray shikibuton resting on the floor. There was no other furniture in the room. "Geez, Kazuhiro. This is just depressing." Maybe I shouldn't judge. This type of floor mattress, I think, was a common alternative to beds in Japanese culture, and so was minimalism. It wouldn't be cool to push my Western sensibilities on someone who doesn't share them. "Careful," Kazuhiro whispered, delicately tilting my head back up towards the ceiling and rearranging the special pillow underneath it so I was stuck in a safer position. I chirped at him, and a gentle smile crept across his face. "Oh. I think we just established a parental bond." "I'll be right back," he promised, slowly pulling his finger out of my grasp. I hadn't even realized I grabbed it. "There's someone I want to introduce to you." Like he said, Kazuhiro returned with another figure in tow. Completely unable to sit up, I turned my baleful expression to the newcomer, an older woman who cooed over me as if I was, well, a baby. My appreciation for Kazuhiro went up another notch as I bore the humiliation in silence. "This is Akaneo Basin," he introduced as the woman continued to prod me. "She'll be helping me take care of you." Oh, thank God. This body was so unbelievably frail. Even with my foreknowledge, I wasn't sure I could keep it alive, not with twig-like bones and unresponsive muscles. Thoughtlessly doing something normal like rolling over or sitting up could kill me. And Kazuhiro was trying, but teenage boys weren't exactly known for their caution. "I wish you had come to me before you bought this so-called Akaneo Basin chattered on, fussing with the chipped wood of the crib. "I still have at Tsuchikun's old crib. You'll find, even after she grows up, you won't be able to let such things go." "Perhaps it would be good to leave it at your home," he proposed. "I won't be able to stay out of the field forever. It might be good for her to spend the night with you. If you are willing." "More than willing," Akane said. "What's the alternative? The daycare? This angel won't be able to find the attention she deserves there." "Oh, hell no. I don't want that kind of attention. Daycare please, Kazuhiro." I heard one of the matrons had an illness, and since they were too understaffed, she came in anyway. It spread amongst the kids and killed 2 of them. "Okay, never mind then." "Yes, I would like to avoid that," Kazuhiro said. They talked for a bit longer before excusing themselves. I thought I heard something about them going to Akane's house to go through her old baby supplies, but I had truthfully stopped listening. Ever since I first learned to feel my own chakra, I had been exploring and charting my pathways. It was relaxing and, better yet, took all my focus and attention, so it was instrumental in relieving my boredom. I could now form a submarine with but a single thought, and I nearly always had one mucking about inside me. After a couple days purposely directing my submarine around my entire body, I decided that I was being an idiot. No cartographer mapped the entire globe in one fell swoop. They started small with a single region they knew. Then they expanded, broadening their scope until all the pieces finally fell into place. So I turned my attention to my right hand and there it remained, will remain until I'm satisfied. You wouldn't think that would take too long. At this stage, I could barely even palm a grape. But God, the chakra pathway system in my hand was so complex. There were 23 of what I knew to be called tenketsu, which I privately referred to as my ports. I formed my submarines by flexing them, which led me to believe that they are almost like muscles. They responded to signals from my brain, and allowed me to consciously move and shape my own chakra just like muscles. Between my ports I'm not sure if they had a name in canon, so I called them my canals. There where most of my chakra sat normally, unmoving until I used my tenketsu to shape it to my will. Something that was incredibly tempting for me to try out on a much larger scale, though I begrudgingly refrained. With my new level of understanding, filtered through the lens of my existing knowledge of physics and maths, I could understand why the doctor didn't want me messing around. Kinda. I'm not sure if chakra took up physical space, I kinda think it has to, but I'm not really sure what mystical bullshit is going on, but I know for a fact that it can interact with the world around it. If it couldn't, Naruto's Rasengan would do less damage than a puff of smoke. My best guess was that my canals were, like the rest of my body at the moment, thin and weak. They relied on subconscious limiters and pain to keep me from irreparably damaging them by accident. It was similar to a person's more mundane muscles. Human muscles could produce a lot of force, more than the bones and joints around them could take, in fact. So the brain put subconscious limiters in place to keep them from going overboard, unless adrenaline told the brain that the situation warranted such an extreme. As a baby, this predicament was a lot worse. My muscles were smaller, yes, but my bones were a lot weaker. If I wanted to, which I obviously didn't, I could break my own arm with ease. I could tell because even the most ordinary motions, if done hard enough, caused a not insignificant amount of pain. It was the same with my canals, I presumed. As I grew older, they'd grow wider and tougher, reforging themselves until they can handle the rough movement of chakra without tearing. For now, I didn't want to risk significant injury, so I resisted the ever-present urge. There was no shortage of distractions so far. The tenketsu and canals were rather straightforward, but those two things only made up the body of the river that was my chakra. There were tributaries, a nearly countless amount. Half brought in trickles of chakra, half brought them out. My vague recollection was that physical energy, yang, would merge with the spiritual yin energy to create chakra, so I imagined that was what the chakra entering my canals was. Sure enough, my submarine fizzled out as soon as I tried to swim up it, against the current. Nothing I tried could affect it even a little, so I gave up and shifted my attention elsewhere. I was much more curious about the other tributaries anyway, the ones chakra was leaving the canals through. Where was all of that going? Once I could finally manage to form a submarine small enough, I would find out. Guardianship wasn't anything like Kazuhiro imagined, or anything like he feared. He had resigned himself to sleepless nights, and had expected an ever-present cacophony of wails and tantrums in between. Unexpectedly, the morning after he first took Kaseki home, Kazuhiro awoke to sunlight flitting through the blinds. She hadn't roused him, not even once. And neither did she wake him up on the second night, or third, or fourth, or ever. Kazuhiro was a chunin who had actively fought in a war. He didn't rest easily, and the slightest noise would have sparked him into alertness. Kaseki didn't even give him that. She never tried. That was extremely abnormal. Infants of this age were supposed to feed every 3 hours, give or take, but she never once woke him up between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. That totaled her to only 6 feedings a day, and she was clearly starving by the time morning rolled around. Since she wasn't going to wake him up, he set an alarm for 4 a.m. for feeding. The first time he did that, she actually made a noise, almost like she was surprised. She had also, with extreme cuteness, reached out and laid a hand on the tip of his nose as he bent down. Perhaps her lack of appetite was due to how little energy she was expending? According to the reference material he had received, the kid was strangely sedentary. Babies were supposed to be always moving in an instinctive attempt to build their muscles, but Kaseki was so still that Kazuhiro frequently grew paranoid that she had passed away under his very nose. He brought that observation to one of the doctors during her 3-day checkup, and they seemed to think it was strange but not dangerous. That all changed towards the end of the first month they were together. Kaseki remained silent and continued to stick to her body's apparently rigid schedule, but she began to move a lot. Never at night, but during the day Kazuhiro swore he saw her doing crunches and other strength-building exercises. She had been able to support her head for extremely brief periods of time since before he had even taken her in. It was rare but not unheard of for a 1-month-old to manage such a feat, but soon there was no wobbliness, and she no longer grew fatigued to the point that she flopped back onto the pillow, something that had always freaked him out. Now that she was active, her formula intake spiked dramatically. He had sprung for a new invention, a refrigerator, though he hadn't realized it had to be connected to the electrical network. That was a pain to arrange, but he managed it eventually. The whole thing cost a ridiculous amount, significantly more than the house itself, but it only put a small dent in his new overall savings. With a new refrigerator, however, he could prep baby formula en masse, and he discovered it was useful for a hell of a lot more than that. Feeding himself became far easier too. Then, his month was up, and with a surprising amount of regret, he made arrangements with Akane-Obasan. Kaseki-chan would stay with her while he was away. He made his way to the hospital, and was eventually met by the first doctor, the same one who wrote Kasaki's birth certificate. "I am here for a clean bill of health regarding my, chakra poisoning," Kazuhiro said formally. The doctor scrutinized him for a moment. Then, request denied. Kazuhiro recoiled. "What? What do you mean?" "I mean that you haven't fully recovered, and I do not pronounce you fit to return to active duty." "Sensei," he argued, thoroughly perplexed. "Kaseki-chan is in good hands. She'll be fine with me gone." "This isn't about your charge," the doctor lied. "This is about you and your injury. Your condition is serious, and you could easily die even without enemy intervention if you use your chakra." Kazuhiro almost verbally reminded the doctor that he only gave him the diagnosis to ensure he was able to take care of Kaseki, but there were people around and there was no chance the doctor had forgotten. Something else was up. "There's still a war going on," he said instead. "IWA needs me." The doctor sighed, cupping his chin and hiding his mouth from lip readers in the process. "IWA doesn't need you for what's about to happen," he said lowly as Kazuhiro struggled to hear him. "She needs you here." He dropped his hand. "My word is final. Now if you'll excuse me, I have patients to attend to." For what's about to happen? A kernel of dread began to form in Kazuhiro's gut. Something big was on the horizon, he could just tell. And it seemed like he would be foisted on the sidelines when it occurred, for better or for worse. Oda Musashi had been stationed in the land of grass when he was ordered to pack his things and break down the camp. Not typically something to bat an eye at, except his company was told to do it quietly in the middle of the night, and there was no relief force to trade places with them. Essentially, they were squandering every inch they had worked for in the last month. He didn't protest, even though a good friend of his died the other week in the defense of this position. Musashi put his faith in Lord Tsuchikage, and he couldn't help but feel a tremor of excitement. This didn't seem like a retreat. The entire camp was mobilized and marched southwest, hunkering down in a forward command post just inside the Earth border. They were among the first to arrive, but not nearly the last. More and more troops trickled in over the course of the next week, until what felt like the entirety of the Awagakure shinobi force was crammed into the tiny base. "I heard Konoha is in the midst of routing Suna," another Chunin gossiped. "They're pushing them back to the Wind border." "Does Lord Tsuchikage think the sand rats will cut across and try something with us next?" another asked. No. Musashi's gut told him that something more significant was about to take place. And only a couple days later, it did. The command post was emptied in silence, each ninja stern and uncompromising as the stones they modeled themselves after. "Our target is Konoha," he had been told. "As they overreach into the land of wind, we'll catch their northeast flank. The explosion core will tunnel underneath, planting traps before surfacing to perform a pincer attack from the opposite side." This was it. The legendary battle he had dreamed of, one that would live on in every history book written in the elemental nations. And levied against Konoha, no less, the first hidden village and the wealthiest, home to infamous clans like the Uchiha, the Senju, the Hyuga, the Aburame, and many more. He approved of the strategy too. This was how ninja war was supposed to be waged, with ambushes and quick, brutal strikes. Not with bunkers and long-range ninjutsu. Musashi wasn't in a position to see their foes approach. He was underground, as was nearly every other member of the Awagakure Jonin forces. Despite their numbers, Command knew that this strategy would work a hell of a lot better with the element of surprise, and Konoha possessed the most formidable sensory-type bloodlines. Not chakra sensors themselves. In that department, Kumo and IWA both had them beat. But with the Inuzuka, Aburame, and especially the Hyuga on Konoha's side, it didn't really matter. Remaining deep enough underground circumvented the first two clans, but the third was still a huge issue. The Hyuga could see through solid objects, including the ground itself, and pick up on chakra signatures. The only way the assembled IWA shinobi could slip past them was by using a technique called Doton, Seishin Keseki no Jutsu, Earth-style, Spirit Stone technique. The technique involved using a Doton nature transformation throughout the user's entire bodies, something that was incredibly difficult and dangerous. Leaving it in place too long would prove fatal, and Masashi bet that at least a couple of their Chunin would die before the first blow would even be exchanged. However, if the Hyuga were to look in their direction with it active, they wouldn't be able to distinguish their bodies from the rock surrounding them. Hopefully. Everyone without a Doton chakra nature, and those less competent with the technique, would be forced to wait nearly a mile away from the ambush site, just in case. With the explosion core kicking off the fight, they would have no issue telling when it began. And neither would he. Masashi both heard and felt a thunderous shake in front of them, and quickly exerted his will upon the surrounding earth, softening it so as not to be crushed to a pulp by the vibrations. His and his comrade's Seishin Kesuki broke at that moment, so they wasted no time to rise to the surface. He found the Konoha battalion in shambles, their dead numerous. Exploding clay had been laced below the ground they uncaringly trod on, and they'd been too absorbed in celebrating their meaningless victory over the sand rats to notice. The trap had been detonated right as the center of their company passed above it, splitting the survivors into two clusters. Masashi and his comrades charged the nearest one, leaving the other for the explosion core to hold off until their distantly awaiting backup arrived. It almost seemed too easy. Until there was an ear-shattering pop, and three massive plumes of smoke erupted from the group they were charging. From within each arose a titan, a purple snake longer than the Tsuchikage's palace was tall, an orange toad with red markings and a pipe big enough to fit 5 of Masahi's peers inside the barrel, and a white and blue slug whose ooze sent streams of noxious vapor into the sky. The three-way deadlock. They were here, as expected. The Sannin. But IWA was ready. His company quickly moved out of the way as a lava golem nearing the slug's size flowed over the ground, clumsily approaching the mammoth mollusk without a care who it crushed/cremated on its way. Controlled by every member of the Kanjiki clan, this jutsu would fry the slug, and keep it from healing the decimated Konoha forces. Then, a massive goat appeared, its curled horns longer than some mountains were tall. Its plated armor-covered battle robes were marked with intricate, crimson patterns, and the behemoth wasted no time charging the toad head first. That left the serpent. Several smaller pops rang out as the great six of the Kamizuru clan called forth their personal summons, and a terrible buzzing filled the air. Bred at the peaks of the mountains surrounding Iwagakure, these giant wasps were formidable, though they were still only as big as the snake's oversized fangs. But they weren't alone. Three-tongued Goro rode to meet the beast on a giant, pure white bird. Explosions rang out as his projectiles singed their target's purple scales, but the creature held strong, hissing in challenge at his aerial foes. When the summoner atop its head sent forth countless smaller snakes that could kill a man with one bite, someone else sent forth a pack of mongooses to hunt them down. IWA might not have had as many noble summons suited for this type of combat, but the will of stone was indomitable. This was what Masashi lived for. So when a dragon made of fire, a mist technique sent by the Sandaime Hokage at the Sandaime Tsuchikage, vaporized him almost instantly, the last sound that left his lips wasn't a scream or curse. It was a laugh. Even though Kazuhiro was a shut-in and only took me outside when it was time for my doctor's visits, I still realized it right away when the war, the Second Shinobi World War, I eventually discovered, ended. The entire time I had lived in IWA, which was around 3 months at this point, the streets had been nearly empty, and there was an oppressive gloom that I could feel just by looking out the window. Then, that changed overnight. Well, the first part at least, there was still an ever-present air of solemnity that dampened almost every face I saw, but the amount of said faces had nearly doubled. And each one was adorned by a Wagakure forehead protector, so it didn't take a genius to figure out that they were soldiers who had returned from war. It also didn't take genius to figure out why they were so upset, despite the war being over. We must have lost. I wanted more than anything to ask for details, but my tongue still wasn't nimble enough and likely wouldn't be for several months. I wasn't sure when babies were supposed to be able to talk, but it wasn't a lack of mental ability holding me back, just physical ability, so I would likely manage the feat early. I felt like I was living my life on quadruple speed mode, and thank fuck for that. I would try to physically condition myself throughout the day with plenty of rest, and between workouts I would explore my chakra. That was something I never got bored of, though I would sometimes grow frustrated when I reached a tributary that was too small to fit my submarines through. Each one varied greatly in diameter, and some were just flat-out unexplorable due to their size. Those were the ones I was most curious about. My senses weren't accurate enough to pinpoint exactly where they were, so I couldn't really guess where they were going. I knew there are a multitude of ways shinobi could use chakra to augment their bodies, and I also knew that there were a multitude of ways they could injure themselves doing so. I'm hoping that my exploration now would give me a head start when I reach that stage of my training. My awareness was slowly, oh so slowly, spreading up my right arm. It was close to reaching my forearm at this point. The appendage wasn't nearly as exciting as my hand, which was almost unfathomably complex. That was probably why hand signs were so integral for casting jutsu. I kept having to revisit the region as my ability to navigate my submarine grew and I could suddenly reach places that had once eluded me. In other news, Kazuhiro was depressed. I didn't know why for the longest time, but I did my best to cheer him up whenever I saw him. My best consisted of grabbing his fingers and making cute noises. To my surprise, it actually seemed to work, though not for long. The morose expression would soon force itself back onto his face shortly after. To my pleasant surprise, as she was usually rather daft and spacey when it came to anything other than child-rearing, Akane Obasan not only noticed his mood, but eventually spoke to him about it. All three of us were at her home across the street, because babies needed enrichment, and there was precious little of it to be found at the Asano household. It was quite lovely, what I saw of it at least. Her son's old crib had been set up in her living room, which featured a giant window that caught as much light as the sky could provide and several floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Scroll shelves? I wondered how she got them all. If this was anything like feudal Japan, they would have been difficult to get a hold of. I failed, Kazuhiro finally said, caving to Akane Obasan's nagging. I failed Hisashi, and I failed Kaseki. How do you mean, Kazuhiro-kun? Akane Obasan asked gently. Iwa struck back at Konoha, he said shortly, avoiding eye contact with the woman and not looking in my direction entirely. And I wasn't there. And we lost the battle. It would have been my only chance to avenge Hisashi and Mana. With the non-aggression pact Lord Tsuchikage signed, I won't get another. Lost is a very strong word, Akane Obasan said hesitantly, choosing to fixate on that for some reason. We were forced to flee, he said angrily, his voice raising. Half the explosion corps is gone, most of the Kanjiki clan and Goro-sama, one of our S-ranked shinobi. Damn. We lost one of our Kage-level shinobi? I'd never heard of Goro from the anime, but no one got that designation for the hell of it. People died in war, no shit. But someone that powerful? I wasn't sure when the Third Shinobi World War would start. We probably had some time left, at least. Nonetheless, dread began to curdle in my stomach. S-rank wasn't enough. I'd have to be even stronger, when the time came. I had no desire to die again, not before I had a chance to live. And those are only the public losses. Who knows how many of our forces have been killed besides that? What was Tsuchikage-sama thinking? Kazuhiro-kun, she admonished, looking over her shoulder as if expecting the door to be busted down. Do not say such things. You or I can't presume to know the motives of Lord Tsuchikage. There must have been a reason. What reason could there be? He cried. I don't know, but Kazuhiro-kun, you must promise not to breathe a word of what I'm about to say to anyone. Do you swear? I was jolted out of my pity for my caretaker. His thought process might have been immature, but he himself was also immature, so it could be excused, and he was really going through it with the death of my parents, at her words. Of all people, did see Akane Obasan was the one with meaningful information? Kazuhiro promised, and the older woman sighed. My son is in a position of importance within Lord Tsuchikage's inner circle, she revealed. He confided to me that, as a direct result of the attack, he himself and Iwagakure as a whole has gained a great advantage. He wouldn't tell me what, exactly, and I knew better than to press. He also told me that, while the losses were significantly higher than expected, they underestimated not the leaf itself but the ability of its highest-ranked shinobi. Lord Tsuchikage is satisfied by the end result. It spoke volumes about the world I was reborn into that someone could say our leader is satisfied with the result of an action that caused the deaths of many of his own people and mean for it to be taken as a reassurance. So you see, there must be more going on here than you or I are aware of, she concluded, though I could have told her so myself if I could speak. Always look underneath the underneath. This was a ninja village, nothing was what it seemed. I still should have been there, Kazuhiro whispered, and Akane laid a gnarled hand on his shoulder. I'm sure Hisashi would have been glad you weren't, she said, and I was certain that she was correct once again. Months passed, and I soon found that I wouldn't be blowing past milestones nearly as fast as I thought I should. Apparently, babies ordinarily developed physically and mentally at around the same rate. So, even though I possessed the mental ability of an adult, it still took just as long for me to be able to, for example, speak, roll over, crawl, and eventually walk. Once I got to that part, however, I was unstoppable. I played constantly, something Akane Obasan only thought was cute because she didn't understand what I was really doing. Cat's cradle? That was for improving finger dexterity. The floor is lava, apparently a real concern in Iwa with the Yotan wielders scattered about, was for nimbleness and footwork. And drawing? Well, that actually was for fun. But hey, it could be helpful in my future as a shinobi. You never know. Akane Obasan encouraged my talents, supplying brushes and colored inks. Not my preferred medium, but I wasn't sure pencils existed, so I made do. Kazuhiro might have been able to put two and two together regarding my self-training, but Iwagakure was struggling financially after the war's kinda sorta end. As such, all available shinobi were sent on mission after mission. And there were no shortage of things to do. With no one slinging jutsu around all over the place, merchants were eager to sell the inventories that had been piling up over the last couple years, and there was much that needed to be rebuilt. Also, Grass kinda hated Konoha now, for some reason, and decided that, out of the 5 great villages that had utterly decimated it over the course of the war, they disliked IWA the least. That brought in a lot of business. So my official guardian wasn't home all that much anymore, leaving me at Akane Obasan's tender mercies. Really, it wasn't so bad. The older woman cared a lot, and wasn't so annoying that I found myself unable to reciprocate her feelings. It was sometimes a little off-putting how involved she was whenever she realized I was awake. She hovered a lot, babbling in baby speak as I played. Not at all like the grandma who had raised me in my last life, God rest her soul. That woman had been a much-needed foil for Sir, who was so strict that. No. There was no need to think about that. This life was supposed to be a fresh start. I did have to deal with nonsense every once in a while. Like on my first birthday, for example, when Akane Obasan decided that I should have a party. I complained, but the old bag didn't seem to piece together what I was complaining about. I could have tried harder, I suppose, but crying in general was beneath me, and crying because I wasn't getting my way was especially so. It was also hard. If I wanted any sound to pass through my lips, I really had to work for it, especially when said sound was in a higher register. But I digress. Akane Obasan wanted me to have a birthday party, a real one, with cake and other kids. I always hated the birthday scenes in Naruto fics, I think because I thought they were always too convenient. But then I realized, I wasn't in Konoha. I wasn't going to run into major characters and create lifelong bonds and rivalries. I wasn't going to meet some important parents and establish myself as a budding prodigy. I was a nobody orphan. Anyone who Akane Obasan could con into attending would be just as ordinary and unremarkable as I was, on paper. Oh, I'm so excited. The old woman gushed. You'll get to make so many new friends. My son Atsuchi-kun passed along my invitations to some of the children of his co-workers. They're all very promising future shinobi, so this will be quite beneficial to your future. Mother. Fucker. Hamamoto Atsuchi, Akane Obasan's son who I still haven't met. Who was apparently high up in Iwagakure command. His co-workers' kids were coming to this? Never mind then. I guess I'd better mentally prepare for a chance encounter with an important character anyway. For better or worse. Ishida Yudai was no longer sure where his life would take him. With their baffling defeat at the hands of Konoha, and the current staffing issues resulting from it, all departments had to be reorganized and merged. His was no exception. In a month, the Black Tengu would no longer enjoy the autonomy they had taken for granted, and would be absorbed into the Red Ogres to form a single, elite division. But that was a headache for tomorrow. Hamamoto Atsuchi, who due to the nature of their respective positions he worked very closely with, had invited him and his son to a meeting disguised as a birthday party for a 1-year-old his mother had taken in. At least, he hoped it was a meeting disguised as a kid's birthday party. He brought a bottle of sake in addition to the obligatory gift, a rubber kunai, just in case. It was a good thing too. The bastard didn't so much as make an appearance. Yudai would learn the following morning that he got caught up in a project and simply forgot. Still, it wasn't as if he was the only one Atsuchi invited. He saw one of his division captains with his kid, a couple he recognized from the Doi clan with a boy, an administrator with his daughter, and a handful of other, somewhat notable figures. Ishida-kun. A frail voice called out in greeting, and he looked up with a smile. Hamamoto-san, he returned, smiling at the elderly woman. You remember Iwao, don't you? Of course, she replied, bending down and pinching his cheeks. His son squirmed in agitation, but Yudai's firm hand on his head kept him from pulling away. Quiet as ever, isn't he? He might get on well with the birthday girl. Once they had taken off their shoes, she led them to the dining room, where, at the end of a long, snack-laden table, was the girl in question. She was in a high chair, but Yudai's first impression was that she didn't belong there. She sat without even the slightest hint of a slouch, and her eyes locked with his immediately, only straying briefly to give his son a passing, dismissive gaze. He felt like he was facing a member of his own Tengu, not a year-old child. This is Ishida Yudai, she introduced to the girl, something he found slightly bizarre. And his son, Ishida Iwao. Yodai-kun, Iwao-kun, meet Imai Kasaiki. Yodai examined her, curiosity piqued. Kasaiki? He clarified. What a peculiar name. The elderly Hamamoto sighed. Yes, quite. She was a survivor of the Fugatoro incident. Her parents were veterans living there, they didn't survive. She was only a month old then. She is now officially in the care of her godbrother who adopted her, but he's away on missions. He's the one who gave her that name. He nodded, mood dampened by the reminder. He recalled the incident in question vividly. It was a catalyst for many changes in IWA. His village might not have even agreed to Kumo's temporary alliance if not for it. The promise of sealing knowledge was enticing, sure, but the pound of flesh was more so. Aishirta-san, a small voice chimed in, and Yodai looked up in shock. Aishirta-kun. Yoroshiku onigi aishirmasu. Extremely taken aback, Yodai glanced back and forth between the tiny girl and Akane. Did she just? He trailed off. Isn't Kasaiki-chan the cutest? The older woman squealed. She's been practicing that all week. The little girl huffed in annoyance and looked away, as if embarrassed that her caretaker had revealed that. Did you teach her that? He asked dubiously, because that was an extremely well-enunciated sentence for a 1-year-old. Also, he doubted the girl had received a guest list and memorized all the names on it, so his surname couldn't have been rehearsed, right? It was clear the syllables would have run together, but it was also clear that she recognized that and chose to space them out to compensate, prioritizing clarity over speed and a more natural, if garbled, sound. He also noted that her voice was strangely hoarse. No! Kasaiki-chan is so smart, she picked that up herself. And she wanted to greet her guests properly. Huh, he said, a little stumped. How long has she been speaking? She said her first word over a month ago, Hamamoto-san said proudly. No. Then arigato. Now, she pulls out phrases she hears at the drop of a hat, when she chooses to speak, that is. Talking at all is difficult for her, due to a chronic injury from that night. No to arigato was a big jump. Arigato had 4 kanas syllables. Very interesting, he muttered, surprisingly not lying in the least. It is nice to meet you, Kasaiki-chan. Iwao is 2.5, so he's a little older than you are. Do you know when you'll be 2.5? Kasaiki's eyes flashed. We'll see, Tober, you're 110. Yodai, if he would get a correct answer at all, expected her to say 1.5 years from now. The answer she gave was far more impressive. What do you want to be when you grow up? He asked. A shinobi, she said immediately. Why? He retorted immediately, and her face lost its aloofness. The corner of her lips tweaked upwards in almost amusement. Why not? Yodai kept a close eye on Kasaiki for the duration of the night, but it was clear the other guests wore her out. The children especially. They were all quite a bit older than her, and though most were forced to be there and quite resigned and subdued as a result, some were excitable. And likely attention-starved, with their parents always working. Then, Hamamoto-san announced it was time for cake. She set the dessert in front of the birthday girl, lit with a single candle, and Kasaiki bore the ensuing, off-pitch singing with the stoicism as a true shinobi. Okay, blow out the candle, Kasaiki-chan, her caretaker encouraged. The child regarded the flickering flame in front of her for a moment, and Yodai briefly wondered if the song had done more damage than he thought. But then, she reached out with her hand. No, Kasaiki-chan, don't touch, the elderly woman cried with a start, but it was too late. Kasaiki pinched the burning wick tightly between her fingers, snuffing it out without even the slightest wince. Kasaiki-chan, Hamamoto-san scolded, fretting over her slightly singed fingers, but it seemed the girl had lost interest. Though she did help herself to a hefty slice of cake when offered, lackadaisically eating with her opposite hand as the older woman applied an unnecessary amount of burned salve to her tiny digits. Before he left the Hamamoto abode, Yodai made plans with Hamamoto-san. Every Tuesday night, Kasaiki would have a playdate with Iwao, because he was certain the girl would grow up to do big things, and he wanted his son to influence, and be influenced by her growth. Additionally, as head of intelligence, he felt it was prudent to watch over an individual born outside of the village, with parentage highly suspected but not confirmed, who exhibited intelligence well beyond what should be expected of someone her age, and whose arrival in Iwagakure was the result of an unexplained and meritless attack by the Hidden Leaf village. Each time he dropped off and picked up Iwao, he performed a scan of some kind on the girl, probing for hidden seals or mental conditioning. Each time, he left both disappointed and relieved, because there was nothing to be found. Iwao was a godsend. Not because I liked him, particularly, but because I now had a child to measure my growth against. Turns out, I had left the kid in the dust, and given him an inferiority complex in the process. I regretted that, but at least I knew I could outthink and outperform a child native to this world, one whose daddy could afford the best tutors a Wagakure had to offer. That might seem a little unfair, coming from a reincarnated 34-year-old, but I had no idea what to expect of the children here. Yes, there were kids like Iwao, who had a moderate degree of talent, but there was also Uchiha Itachi, Hatake Kakashi and others who could probably outclass me in every way. Advanced mental development or not. So I was glad to have confirmation. And the kid wasn't the worst company, all things considered. Despite his status, he wasn't arrogant or spoiled, and he knew when to shut up. He also knew how to read, with impressive proficiency for his age. Something that I knew I'd need to learn, although that understanding didn't stop me from procrastinating as much as I was humanly able. Language in the elemental nations, or in Iwagakure at least, was weird. Everybody spoke both English and Japanese, and though English, called common, was used most prevalently, there were times people were expected to speak in Japanese, called traditional. I had no idea as to the origin for this system, and Akaneo Basin didn't either. But while common was the preferred language for speaking, traditional was the preferred language for writing, and I couldn't even begin to decipher what each symbol meant on my own. It didn't help that there were essentially 3 different alphabets: hiragana, katakana, and kanji. From my old life, I knew that hiragana was the written language most native to Japan, while katakana was a phonetic alphabet that was basically a go-between for other languages and Japanese. Words from other languages that didn't possess hiragana were written in katakana. Meanwhile, kanji were Chinese symbols that represented entire words, adapted to Japanese. In the elemental nations, hiragana was mainly used informally, like in menus at quick-service restaurants, fiction novels, or in messages on bulletin boards. Katakana were interspersed with hiragana, as they were the only way to write many words. However, they weren't yoinked from another language, supposedly. Instead, they were simply created to represent new developments, as if someone had the bright idea at one point to make an entirely new language instead of adding to one of the 2 existing ones. I won't complain only because it was by far the easiest for me, a native English speaker, to learn. Meanwhile, kanji were more formal. Names and titles were typically written in kanji, and I've never seen a scroll bearing hiragana or katakana. Kanji were the hardest for me to get a hang of, as there were so many elements hidden within each one of them. Akaneo Basin offered me lessons, but they weren't very helpful. She wasn't a skilled teacher, and she had forgotten completely what it was like to learn the language. Iwao-kun, who remembered like it was yesterday, since it practically was, knew what was helpful, what was not, and shared shortcuts he had discovered himself or been taught by his tutors. All it took was some heavy-handed manipulation. He was so desperate to prove he was better than me at something, anything, he agreed to the proposition almost immediately. It helped that he was, at heart, a gentle boy, and wasn't emotionally cognizant enough to understand the jealousy that surged through his veins. I felt bad for using the kid, so I made sure to pay him back for his services with interest. Not that he noticed. I taught him games that would improve his flexibility, which I knew had to be nurtured at an early age, and instilled habits that would improve his overall conditioning. Still, even with his guidance, it took an embarrassingly long amount of time to learn how to read and write. Perhaps even longer than it took actual babies. I slowly and surely made progress, however, because I refused to be illiterate. To test myself on kanji one day, I pulled one of the dusty scrolls off Akaneo Basin's shelves. None of them were labeled whatsoever, so I had no clue what their subjects would be. What I found was the last thing I could have possibly expected. Step-by-step diagrams, each illustrating the creation process of a motherfucking seal. Akaneo Basin, I croaked, the hoarseness in my voice having little to do with my injury. What is this? Oh, these are some old scrolls my Atsuchi-kun left here, she said breezily, waving her hand as if it was no concern. I can't make heads or tails of them. Do you like the pretty pictures, Kasaki-chan? My brain was still short-circuiting. Yeah. Pretty pictures, I murmured. Wasn't sealing knowledge incredibly rare? And wasn't Iwagakure kinda known for being especially shit at it? How was there a sealing library in this random woman's home? And who the fuck was Hamamoto Atsuchi? At least this kinda explained why she had so many goddamn calligraphy brushes lying around. Are there any with words, Obasin? I asked. I haven't looked through them all myself, she admitted. I don't really understand them. I'm not supposed to show them to anyone, but I won't tell Atsuchi-kun if you don't. Just make sure to return the scroll to their exact same spot, alright? I'm pretty sure they're organized in a special way. If Akaneo Basin had looked through a couple, there likely weren't privacy or self-destruction seals on them. Sloppy, but convenient for me, so I set to work. It took me hours just to find something that wasn't a diagram, and I was disappointed but not surprised to find that I couldn't understand a lick of it. The kanji were unfamiliar to me, and many likely had no English translation. If I wanted to even begin to crack this mystery, I would need some kind of dictionary. I activated Puppy Dog Eyes no Jutsu and turned to Akaneo Basin. Every time Kazuhiro returned home from a mission, he found a different child waiting for him. That's what it felt like anyway. Kaseki was growing at an unfathomable rate, and he had missed all of her landmarks. When he returned from a 2-month-long bodyguard mission in the Land of Grass, and found his godsister speaking incomplete sentences, he nearly had a heart attack. She wasn't his daughter or anything, so he wasn't too disappointed at this, only feeling a distant sort of pride and happiness. At first. But then he remembered that Hisashi didn't even have the option to be present for his daughter's first steps or to finally hear her say the word Tuchan. That was when he got sad. He had missed his parents when they passed, but Kaseki had never even known her own. Which was why, even though his heart ached every step of the way, he took Kaseki by the hand and led her through the streets of Iwagakure to the Monument of the Fallen. A giant rendition of the Tsuchikige's conical hat was carved into its base of the surmount, the tallest mountain that sat directly behind the Tsuchikige's palace. Underneath the kite-shaped space that the embossed kanji for Earth resided, was a line of text. Upon the strongest base, the highest peak will rise, a soft voice spoke from his side, and Kazuhiro nearly flinched. She could read? That's right, he said awkwardly, before pausing. He really didn't want to do this. He really didn't want to be here with his god-sister. But it needed to be him. He owed it to Hisashi. The names, she said, reaching out towards the stone before hesitating, fingertips an inch away. There are fallen comrades, aren't they? This time, Kazuhiro did flinch. How did she guess that? And are fallen comrades? Yes, they are, he said finally. Engraved into the space around the kite, though not as deeply as the Earth kanji itself, were countless names. So many, in fact, that they had run out of space in the hat itself, and many had artfully spilled over onto the surrounding mountainside. He decided to parrot what his academy sensei had told his class when they visited all those years ago. Do you notice anything about the names here? He asked. Kaseki regarded the monument for a moment before answering. They're all written in different handwriting. He nodded in agreement. That's because they were all engraved by different people. When an IWA shinobi falls in combat, one of their comrades will inscribe their name into the monument with Doton manipulation. And you see how there is a dash between each name? That's to represent our bond. Past, present, and future, all of our shinobi are connected. Then, he broke script. I've written 11 names on this monument. Kaseki shot him a look that he couldn't begin to decipher. I'm sorry for your losses, she said softly. Were my parents among them? He exhaled heavily. Yes. Do you want to talk about them? Do you want, not can you? The word choice made his heart ache. But maybe he was overthinking it. Hisashi always said he was in his head too much. You don't have to, if it hurts too much, she said hastily. Kazuhiro wasn't sure if the words made him feel relieved, disturbed, or embarrassed. Some shinobi he was, if a child could see through him so easily. Your Oka-san wasn't in my life for very long, he admitted. But she was kind, from what I saw. She was a jonin though, so she must have had an edge to her. Your Ota-san, on the other hand, he was serious. Compassionate to those he considered a part of his family, more reserved with comrades. Deadly to his enemies. He taught me how to be a man, how to fight, how to work as a team. I loved my own father, but he didn't know how to do most of those things himself, so Hisashi stepped in when he felt like he had to. And I could never thank him enough for that. Do you have a picture? She asked him. Cameras were a relatively recent development, so he did not. However, I think they began taking photographs for Iwagakure's shinobi registrar before he was retired. I can ask, to see if they ever got theirs done. Also, Hisashi made his way into several bingo books. I can show them to you. Kaseki nodded in thanks, and wrapped her arms around his leg in an almost hug. He wrapped his free hand around her shoulder and pulled her close. Ano, could you also teach me what my two-sen taught you? She asked hesitantly. When you're a bit older? Certainly. He just had to make sure he was still around when the time came. Kazuhiro, for the longest time, had simply been going through the motions. After his parents' deaths and the disaster that precluded his promotion to Chunin, His only goal on missions was to survive and do his best to make sure his enemies didn't. There was nothing to protect aside from Iwa's ambiguous interests as a whole, and there was no one depending on him. Hisashi would have been sad at his passing, but he would have been alright without him. Even when Kazuhiro adopted Kaseki, it hadn't really sunk in. Not until this very moment. He finally had a reason to grow stronger. So he would. By whatever means necessary, he would live until Hisashi's torch had been passed on to his daughter. The girl backed up 2 paces from him, and bowed her head solemnly. Arigato and I-san. Well into my 2nd year of new life, I had gained total, I think, though some of the smallest tributaries may have eluded me, awareness within my dominant arm. I imagine that the left was simply mirrored, though I'd refrained from spoiling the surprise by checking. I wanted to gradually expand my mapped regions rather than skip around to other parts of my body, because I was worried I'd forget what I had previously learned in the meantime. Therefore, if I wanted to get to my other arm, I had to pass through my torso, which I was substantially more wary of messing with. Of course, that hadn't stopped me during the initial voyages I had taken before deciding to map out a small segment of my body at a time. I had, a bit stupidly, circumnavigated great stretches of my entire body without sending myself into cardiac arrest, and I could control my submarines a lot more skillfully now than I could have back then. Each ripple of chakra conformed to the size and shape of its surroundings, which was both a good and bad thing. Good because I never had to worry about sharp edges puncturing my canals, and bad because, as I forced smaller spaces to accommodate them, the submarines tended to speed up. A lot. It was similar to the effect of exit diameter on water pressure. Like how, if you change a setting on a hose that makes its opening smaller, the water will shoot out with more force. If I moved my submarine from a wider canal to a smaller tributary, it would go a lot faster. This was dangerous, because my internal awareness and reflexes weren't great, and if I let a fast submarine slip out of my control, its momentum would carry it forward no matter what. And my tributaries were rarely straight. I've pierced my canals more times than I could count, and it was never that big a deal. The internal damage it caused was reminiscent of an extremely sharp jab of a needle, just, inside me. However, those were all in my arm. There were a handful of extremely important things in my chest. If I pierced my stomach, intestines, appendix, liver or kidneys, the toxic sludge they housed could seep into places that they really shouldn't. If I pierced my lungs, I could drown in my own blood. And if I pricked my heart, I might just straight up die. My solution to the pressure problem was a technique I created, which I called splitting. When I decided to venture down a tributary, I split my submarine into 2 parts, one that was the perfect size to fit the tributary, and another that would continue down the original canal, fizzling out without my conscious will pushing it onwards. The trick was judging what sizes to split my submarine into. As much as I liked the submarine metaphor, I didn't actually have a sonar or any means of navigation beyond memory and feel. So, I had no way of judging how wide a tributary would be before I entered it, which meant I had to rely solely on memory to decide how small to make each split. All the more reason to take things slow, I guess. Until I, once again, got bored. Then all bets were off. I did have the sense to only attempt it while Kazuhiro was home from a mission. He could get me to a hospital a lot faster than Akaneo Basin. Cautiously, I began exploring this new frontier. I inched forward, deciding to first delve into the main canals thoroughly before venturing down any tributaries. It was there that I ran into a massive, underground spring. It was similar in shape to one of my tenketsu, only a lot bigger and more powerful. It pulsed with chakra, and unlike the other tenketsu, I couldn't flex it like a muscle. Ever since that trip to the monument to the fallen, I felt a lot closer to Kazuhiro. I made him uncomfortable, I could tell, but he did an admirable job at moving past that. Also, the only things he knew about kids and their development were what he had learned from those pamphlets. He'd had no exposure to anyone my age since he was that age himself, which meant he had no preconceived notion of what typical kid behavior was. He rarely batted an eye at unusual requests regarding personal interests, especially in regards to literature. All that was to explain how I received a series of ninja biology texts for my 2nd birthday, actual books rather than scrolls, thankfully. And I didn't have to look very far to discover the object of my search. In the prefix of the introductory text was a map of the chakra circulatory system, depicting a human's channels, but not any of the tributaries, and all the tenketsu, 8 of which were rather special. I facepalmed as soon as I made the discovery. I already knew that the 8 gates were a thing, I just forgot about them. Well, more accurately, I just thought they were a niche little piece of biology that didn't have much significance aside from the boost they gave when they were opened. Reading more about the gates, which weren't touched on until the 2nd volume, I discovered that my assumption was very, very wrong. The 8 gates are wells of chakra sequestered off from the rest of the circulatory system, I read. As chakra stimulates the organs surrounding them, each of the gates stores regulate vital functions. Therefore, the amount of chakra within each of them, which grows through continued use and conditioning just like one's general chakra reserves, reflects the performance of said organ. If these stores were compromised in some way, the body would experience a vital loss of function. Well, that would explain the tearing muscles, broken bones, and red skin. My guy should have never been put in charge of children. Additionally, the gates themselves and the chakra within them each fulfills certain functions. Kaiman, the gate of opening, is located in the brain's left hemisphere and stimulates the processes that traditionally take place within it, such as logical thinking, language processing, mathematical proficiency along with speed of calculation, and sequential problem solving. As such, it becomes a source of spiritual yin energy, which is a fundamental building block of chakra. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their kaiman might report headaches, decreased analytical prowess and concentrative ability, and the loosening of subconscious limitations that would have otherwise protected the body from itself. Kuman, the gate of healing, is located in the brain's right hemisphere and also stimulates the processes that traditionally take place within it, such as spatial awareness, vivid imagination, pattern recognition, proficiency in the arts, and intuition. Like the Kaiman, the Kuman is a source of yin energy. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their Kuman might also report headaches, along with a reduced ability, or even an inability to judge one's level of exhaustion, hyperactivity, and inability to tie effects to causes and unnatural irritability. Simon, the gate of life, is located in front of the spinal cord, between the esophagus and the T1 thoracic vertebra, below the base of the brain stem. Yin energy from both the Kaiman and the Kuman coalesces inside the Simon, and is divided into 2 equal portions. The first remains in the Simon, combining with physical yang energy to become holistic chakra, while the other is sent downward along the right hemisphere of the Anochi no Yubua, see section 30b, to meet the same fate in the Kaiman. Because of this, the Simon is considered to be one of 2 major chakra springs within the human body. However, it fulfills one unique function beyond that. The Simon receives information from pain receptors and other nerves, and distributes healing yang-skewed chakra to the injury. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their Simon might report extreme fatigue, shortness of breath, shooting pain through the upper back, and non-localized hemorrhaging. Shaman, the gate of pain, is located below the Simon, between the lungs and the T8 thoracic vertebra. The third source of yin energy. This gate holds a person's chakra identity, and between any number of subjects, no 2 are the same. Evidence of both elemental affinities and most chakra bloodlines, if applicable, can be found in this gate, which nurtures each of them. Note, this gate is not the root of bloodlines or elemental affinities, it simply regulates their effectiveness. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their shaman might feel physiological pain, especially in their spine and hands, and bloodline wielders might suffer even more drastic side effects from their jutsu. Treat multi-affinity bloodline wielders with extreme caution if there is a suspected dysfunction with shaman, for your own safety as well as theirs. Taman, the gate of limit, is located in the abdomen, between the liver and the solar plexus, and acts as an intermodal chakra point in the upper chest, regulating passive chakra enhancement to both of a person's arms. It receives unconscious signals from the brain, and distributes chakra to each arm accordingly, enhancing both muscle and bone. Shinobi with a sufficient level of skill can augment these further, but a healthy and well-developed Taman increases the capacity with which said shinobi is able to do so. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their Taman might report muscle soreness, a feeling of bloatedness, tightness, or artificial heat in their arms, and bone fatigue that may cause injury after training or combat. Kaiman, the gate of view, rests just above the stomach. Yang energy produced as a byproduct of the digestive process coalesces with yang energy produced from exertion, which is brought into the Kaiman through countless inward-flowing canary and scenery chakra coils that siphon energy from surrounding cell groups all over the body. From there, the yang energy is divided into 2 equal portions. The first remains in the Kaiman, combining with spiritual yin energy to become holistic chakra, while the other is sent upward along the left hemisphere of the Anochi no Yubua, see section 30b, to meet the same fate in the Simon. Because of this, the Kaiman is considered to be one of 2 major chakra springs within the human body. Just as the stomach signals to the brain when it's in need of sustenance, so too does the Kaiman dictate when the body needs to produce more chakra. Due to their close proximity, chakra exhaustion often manifests as an extreme hunger, and consuming food plays a role in overcoming chakra exhaustion as yang energy is partially created as a byproduct of the digestive process. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their Kaiman may experience stomach aches, an overactive appetite, strange cravings, especially of meat, or chronic bouts of mild to intense chakra exhaustion. Kaiman, the gate of wonder, is located amidst the intestines. It is similar in function to the Taman, although regulates a person's passive chakra enhancement to their legs instead of arms. Thusly, Patients that experience a dysfunction in their kaimen might also experience muscle soreness, a feeling of bloatedness, tightness, an artificial burning sensation in their legs, and bone fatigue that may cause injury after training or combat. Long-lasting sensations indistinguishable from the urge to urinate have also been reported. Shimon, the gate of death, is within the heart itself. It acts as the greatest depository of chakra within the human body, and its sole task is to maintain the heart's effectiveness. The chakra inside will not be surrendered until the person's death, no matter the circumstances. Patients that experience a dysfunction in their Shimon will die. I stared at the words, reading and rereading them as I tried not to start giggling like a lunatic. Aside from the 8th gate of death, really scary that an issue with that gate immediately killed you, by the way, these were all motherfucking stats. I grabbed a pencil. Yeah, Iwagakure had those after all, kinda thought they hadn't been invented yet since Akaneo Basin didn't have a single one, and wrote a word next to each entry. Kaiman, opening, equals logic. Kuman, healing, equals creativity. Simon, life, equals yin production and physical recovery. Shaman, pain, equals chakra affinity. Taman, limit, equals strength. Kaiman, view, equals yang production and chakra regen. Kaiman, wonder, equals speed. Kinda. Not really. But there was something there that sent my little nerd brain buzzing, some compulsive need as a shonen enjoyer to devise a system of power scaling. Let's pretend this stupid fantasy in my head had merit. If these were stats, then what was the metric? Chakra? If so, was there a standardization for measuring chakra, like some sort of calorie? Like, with a single unit being the exact amount of chakra to power the kawarimi or something? This required further thinking, and a lot more research. If only I could find a person smart enough to answer all of my questions. For now, though, I would explore the gate of limit, and hopefully not rupture anything important in the attempt. I was addicted, and the ocean was my drug. In my first life, I was born in Tampa, Florida, and the same day I left the hospital, I was taken to the beach. Every day since, I had been taken or voluntarily returned to lounge, swim, surf, or boat, unless there was a hurricane or equally sufficient reason not to. Hell, I do my homework at the beach. Salt water ran through my veins. Then I left for the Naval Academy in Maryland, and even though there wasn't a traditional sand beach, I still spent all my limited free time in or around the ocean. I hadn't been away from it for any significant length until my reincarnation, and it was slowly driving me mad. I felt like SpongeBob in episode 1. It would be a bit strange to simply come out and ask to be taken swimming. I had never so much as seen a substantial body of water, and suddenly developing a fixation didn't make sense at all. So, I tried to devise a way for Kazuhiro to bring me to a body of water first, after which I could better justify an obsession. There were no oceans anywhere nearby. The polar ocean was over a week's travel north and was, by all accounts, intolerable to be around, much less inside of. But, at this point, any body of water would do. I thought that IWA must have some kind of lake or pool, but if there was one, I had no idea where it was. But then it hit me. Water walking was a basic skill for all shinobi, and even though Iwagakure's ninja didn't fight near water often, there was no way that command would tolerate such a gaping hole in their skill sets. Nai-san? I asked one day. Is it true shinobi can walk on water? Ueo said his Otosan told him they could. Do you know how to do it? Yes, Kasaiki-chan, Kazuhiro answered genially. I learned in the academy, thankfully. There are many bodies of water and grass, rain, and rivers. Which was where he had been deployed during the war. Yua's academy must have been a hell of a lot more thorough than Konoha's. If I recall, Naruto hadn't even learned the skill until he was about to take the Chunin exams. Although, there currently might have been a greater emphasis placed on early education, what with the war that had only just recently ended. How did you do it? I asked eagerly. Kazuhiro, to his credit, had realized he didn't have to dumb down answers for me on account of my age. I was nearing 3 years old, and we had spoken a fair bit about chakra. Unfortunately, he seemed to be almost as clueless as I was in regards to chakra theory. He explained water walking, corroborating what I already knew from the show. Finally, the coup de grace. Can you show me? Kazuhiro was 19, and I rarely showed interest in anything he could do. He should have been chomping at the bit to show off. It's not all that exciting, he said demurely, like he was a shy schoolgirl. Please? I uncharacteristically begged, and he sighed. I could fill up the bathtub, he mused, and I cringed internally. I hadn't thought of that. No, that won't be as cool, I claimed. Don't we have a lake or something in the village you can stand on? No, not really, he said. Not aside from Lake Magata, which is where I learned. Jackpot. Let's go there, then, I said excitedly. I'm sorry, Kaseki-chan, it's not possible, he said firmly. Lake Magata is underground, deep beneath the mountains. People aren't allowed in there, it's only ever used for shinobi training. You'll be able to see it when you reach the academy, but it's too dangerous for you now. You might be hit by a stray weapon or jutsu. Is it really that busy? I asked, feeling my smile dim. Well, not exactly, he hedged. But civilians aren't allowed there anyway. Just be patient, Kaseki-chan. Wow, no one had ever accused me of not being patient before. I spent weeks at a time sitting at the bottom of the ocean, waiting for enemy action without knowing if it would actually ever come. You didn't get to my position without patience, but Kazuhiro was right. For some reason I found myself lacking in said trait at the moment. Certainly when my chakra practice was concerned. Was my physical age impacting my mental state more than I considered? The thought was alarming, but I, perhaps willfully, allowed myself to explain away the observation. Chakra practice was incredibly exciting, surely that was a satisfactory reason, right? I couldn't afford to second-guess my mental state. Not now. As for my current impulses, my love of water was the one tie I allowed myself to my past life. The people, the places, those were all gone. They had to be. I wanted them to be. But in this strange, harsh new world was a little bit of familiarity too much to ask for. I hatched a devious plan, using Iwao as my pawn. After a bit more nagging, I learned from Kazuhiro that academy students learned water walking in their 5th year at the academy. There were 6 years in total, specifically during the 2nd semester. Since it was September, they were approaching that now. So for several months, including on my own birthday, I stalked the academy students with little Iwao by my side, under the guise of playing ninja. Conveniently, there was a park right outside of the academy. It wasn't exactly public, as it was used by the students, but if we stayed on the outskirts and out of everybody's way, nobody bothered to make us leave. Iwao, of course, wasn't privy to my true objectives, but he grew used to me randomly excusing myself if I saw large groups of 5th-year students. I had memorized most of the roster, leave together during academy hours. Your stealth ability has risen by 1. Psych. I wish, but although a small part of me still hadn't given up hope, there was nothing to suggest I had any latent gamer abilities. Instead, I had to stalk them the old-fashioned way, by hiding behind buildings and pretending to shop, looking for a lost piece of jewelry or doing whatever else I could think of. Finally, my efforts bore fruit. I followed an entire class through the streets, and to a cave dug into a mountain to the left of the surmount, which the monument to the fallen had been carved onto. It was clearly man-made, and perfectly proportioned stairs led down into the underground. I didn't go in just yet, of course. I couldn't hide from the academy students or sensei in such a cramped space, even without taking into account the echo my footsteps would make. But I did return a couple days later, after sneaking away from Iwao early into our play date. I figured I'd have a couple hours before Akaneo Basin got worried and discovered my absence. I had hoped the tunnel wasn't too winding, as I had no way to navigate it. Luck seemed to be on my side, however, because the tunnel actually had signs. I just had to supply the light, something I managed with a torch fashioned from a large stick, some baby clothes that no longer fit me, and cooking oil. I carried another in my free hand, unlit, and I had a flint and steel in my pocket just to be safe. Plus, I noted the turns I took on a piece of paper, digging the point of my pencil into the page deep enough that I could feel the L or R I wrote just in case my torches weren't sufficient. I wasn't taking any chances. Though the tunnels were wide and as non-threatening as they could possibly be, minus the darkness, the underground still freaked me the fuck out. Ever since I heard about those miners in Chile, I've avoided caves or tunnels like the plague. It spoke volumes to my swimming withdrawal that I was willing to brave this at all. But then again, wasn't I supposed to be a kunoichi in training? An IWA kunoichi? What self-respecting rock ninja would be afraid of a goddamn tunnel? For fuck's sake. Taking a deep breath, I decided to view this as exposure therapy. I found solace in the fact that, one day, a cave-in would be about as threatening to me as the waves I once surfed on. That was to say, a little threatening, but not so much that they should be avoided altogether. I knew better than anyone else that the element I was most comfortable with could still spell my demise, if I wasn't careful. After about 20 minutes of search, I found my quarry. Rather, nearly fell into my quarry. There was solid rock and then immediately water at the same surface level. Geez, no railing or anything? Still, I couldn't stop a wide grin from stretching across my face. There was a brazier along the wall, next to the tunnel I entered from. It was fueled and ready for ignition, so I extended my torch, taking a reflexive step back as heat scalded me with a greater intensity than I had anticipated. The light from the fire illuminated most of the lake, which was a lot wider than I imagined. I could scarcely understand how the mountain hadn't collapsed upon it. Without any wind, the lake's surface was flat, glassy, and undisturbed. Unnatural. With no effort, I could see my reflection, something I typically avoided because I had a very clear picture of what I looked like, and the face that stared back at me was assuredly not it. My face was supposed to be heart-shaped, not broad and thuggish. My hair was supposed to be blonde, bleached even lighter by the constant sun, not mahogany. The reflection that stared back at me had no dimples, no freckles, and was unblemished aside from tiny scars and two conspicuous pores. I didn't linger on it for long. Though I couldn't tell from down here, daylight was burning, so I quickly stripped off my outer layer. Underneath my normal clothes, I wore the closest thing I could find to a swimsuit, a loose white and red tunic with cinched arm and leg openings. It was thin enough, almost like cheesecloth, that it wouldn't drag or weigh me down much, and it wouldn't absorb or retain a lot of water either. Not enough to bleed through my outer layer, at least, which was purposefully dark enough to hide any wet spots. Testing the water with my toe, I found it to be, surprisingly enough, not freezing. Sure, it was quite brisk, but I was expecting far worse given my surroundings. With a sigh of pleasure, I sank in fully, my body quickly growing accustomed to the chill. Unable to help myself, I began to giggle uncontrollably, which soon transformed into laughter of pure, and only a little bit deranged, joy. I dove into the depths, pushing this body as fast as it could handle. In the water, I felt unstoppable. I swam laps, first at breakneck pace and then slowly, lazily. I floated on my back for what could have been half an hour. My new body wasn't strong in the same ways as my last body was. I could blame a great deal of that on age, but some of that also came from my lack of exposure to water. Swimming was an aerobic exercise superior and more comprehensive than almost any other. Though I tried my best to replicate the effect on land, most exercises only used select parts of the body, while ignoring others completely. As a result, the lesser used muscle groups stayed weak, which could bite me in the ass. Now that I had a water source to train in, hopefully that deficiency would right itself. Then, the best day of my new life was interrupted. I heard voices from the tunnel behind me, and I froze like a deer in the headlights, craning my ears to make out what they were saying. After the unintelligible muttering gave way to something more lucid, I heard a younger, feminine voice. "Sensei, is there someone else here?" "Maybe someone just left the light burning," another boy suggested. "No, there's definitely someone here," came the voice of a more mature woman. "Shit. I kinda thought no one would use this pool. The war was over, so I assumed there would be less of an emphasis placed on learning to fight on terrains most commonly found in foreign countries." "What should I do? Should I hide?" "Probably not. The odds of me successfully evading a jonin, I assume this is a sensei and her team, were non-existent. Better just face the music head-on, and hope they don't throw me in jail." "Hello?" I chirped happily as they rounded the corner. The genin, all missing brown combat vests, seemed taken aback by my presence, though I didn't spare them much attention. "Mommy? Sorry. Mommy?" Their jonin sensei was hot. Not hot in a straight way either. She had short hair, giant biceps, and holy shit thighs. Her outfit, the standard Iwagakure uniform, wasn't even flattering and I could barely tear my eyes away. But though I could appreciate the sight, I could feel my body lacking the equipment to appreciate the sight. It was strange, not to mention a little alarming. The kunoichi also seemed incredibly displeased by my presence. There was a heavy scowl on her face, and I immediately realized that my initial plan, which was to act childish and stupid, probably wouldn't be taken well at all. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "No nonsense? And don't say some shit about getting lost." "Sensei," one of her students interjected with a frown. "She's just a kid." "No, you're right," I said, to everyone's visible surprise. "I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I wanted to be." "Oh? And why would you want to be in a restricted training area?" the hot sensei asked. "Training," I said immediately. "Strength exercises, specifically, and improving my endurance. I'm going to be a shinobi," I said belatedly, hoping to appeal to her professionalism. "Why?" she asked, and I blinked in surprise. "Why do I want to be a shinobi?" I clarified, but she shook her head. "I don't give a shit about that. Why did you decide to sneak in here, just to train?" Crap. I was hoping she'd take that at face value. "Well," I hedged. I didn't really sneak in, no one stopped me. But I chose this place because I run a lot. But that mostly just trains your lower half. Swimming is, like, the upper body version of running. You know, 'cause you're moving yourself with your arms. It was a childish way of thinking, but hopefully, since I was a child, it would fly. It's working too, I tacked on nervously as her eyes continued to pierce through my soul. They were electric blue and cold as ice. I can tell because it's wearing out my body in ways I've never experienced before. She stared back impassively for several more moments, before tossing her head. Your training session is over. We have our own to get to. I nodded, turning to leave. But then I remembered the feeling of the water and stopped. I want to come back and train again, I said boldly, and she turned her eyes back to me. Feel free to book it when you get your own headband, she said, but I was already shaking my head. I'm going to be Iwa's top shinobi one day, I said, deadly serious. But I can't be, if I don't start now. One of the little behind her giggled, but Sexy Sensei gave no tells as to what she thought of my claim. The strongest shinobi? She finally clarified. Not the strongest kunoichi? Ah, a fellow feminist. Not to profile, but who's shocked? I grinned, though there was little humor. The GOAT. Greatest of all time. Or I would die trying, and not necessarily by choice. Such was the world I now lived in. If you want my blessing to use this training ground, you'll have to prove to me you're worth it, she said dangerously. The Jonin raised her hands and performed what I recognized to be a hand seal. I didn't know them yet, but I committed its appearance to memory nonetheless. Then, she shifted to a second, and raised her palm upward. It began to glow. Ninpo, Chisana Hikari no Jutsu, she announced. Ninja art, little light technique. Cute. It's an E-rank jutsu, which barely requires any skill at chakra manipulation to cast. Learn it. Holy shit. I was being taught a jutsu. I didn't even care that it was E-rank, didn't know that was a thing, actually. I thought D-rank like the Kawarimi and Henge were as low as the classification went. All I cared about was how I was going to be able to do fucking ninja magic. I would love to, I said with extreme sincerity. But I'm only 3, and I was told that I would rupture my everything if I tried to mold chakra. At 3, your pathway should be resilient enough to handle this, the Jonin said. As long as you aren't an idiot and try to channel too much too quickly. Be gentle and purposeful with your chakra, and you should have no injuries. She drew herself up straighter. Return here exactly a week from now. If you can perform the jutsu for a whole 5 minutes, consecutively of course, I will allow you to exercise here while I train my team. If you fail, I will judge you as having no talent, and I will personally ensure you can never take a step into this training ground until it is time to learn water walking with your class in the academy. Do I make myself clear? This wasn't Konoha, that's for sure. But I flourished in the military, and I was more than accustomed to harsh taskmasters. And even more than that, my blood sang at the challenge. As crystal. I'll see you in a week, I said with perfect confidence, and hurried back the way I came. The sun was much too far along in the sky, and I had to get home to receive my scolding. When his little godsister asked him for a scroll on hand seals, Kazuhiro didn't think much of the request. Drilling the movements was vitally important for a shinobi in training, though many settled for simply memorizing the sequences of the jutsu they learned. He didn't have to ask to know that Kaseki wouldn't so much as entertain the prospect of taking that shortcut, however, so he agreed easily and bought her the manual. It was adorable watching her attempt to contort her fingers into the unnatural positions, and she often got frustrated. But the scary level of focus she sometimes possessed overcame her difficulty, and after spending an entire day doing nothing else but sequences, she managed a shaky grasp of all 12 basic seals. I won't accidentally perform a jutsu if I practice combinations, will I? The little girl asked, awkwardly holding up the dragon sign. No, Kazuhiro answered. The hand position is only half of what makes a hand seal. The other half is a pulse of chakra, originating from the major tenketsu in both hands. And beyond that, most jutsu also require a conscious direction of chakra, which can be aborted. For example, Kazuhiro, showing off a little, flashed through 5 hand seals, ram, boar, ox, dog, snake, and reached out towards a dining room chair with his chakra. An instant later he and it had swapped places. That was the Kawarimi no Jutsu, he announced. When I wove the signs, it created a projectile chakra pulse, which I had to consciously fire at the chair, my object of choice. When it came in contact with the chair, it switched our positions. Aiming and firing that chakra pulse takes practice, and can be difficult to do in the middle of a fight. Kaseki had watched the demonstration with the appropriate amount of awe, but he could tell that, behind those expressive, brown eyes, her mind was working overtime. When you say Major Tenketsu in the hands, which of the 23 are you referring to? She asked, excitedly. Kazuhiro was caught flat-footed by the question. 23? He asked. Well, I don't know about that. Anatomy isn't my strong suit. Very little was, unfortunately. I was taught to flare my chakra through all of them, he said, his tone making the statement coming out more as a question. I know some of my classmates had difficulty flaring all of them at once. Kazuhiro had different problems, but he didn't wish to admit them to his adopted sister. Fascinating, she chirped. Thank you, Anai-san. I understand why this wasn't working now. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and from memory formed her hands into the nacelle. Then, she shifted it into Tatsu and unclasped her hands, leveling a palm upward. It began to glow with soft light. Yatita! She cheered, though not enough to disrupt her jutsu. Kazuhiro stared, gobsmacked. Is that a he trailed off, not finishing the question as the answer was obvious. I went to the hospital to ask when I could start using chakra safely, she said cheerfully. One of the nurses said I should be able to do this one now if I was careful. She showed me the hand signs. Did she tell you what constitutes using chakra safely? He asked anxiously, as the phrase was incredibly vague. Yep, she said. She said that if I felt twinges of pain, I need to use less chakra, and if I start to feel woozy I need to stop until a day after I feel better. That checked out, he supposed. But by the Kami, what was with this child? The requests she made from medical texts were strange enough, but he could write that off as an extension of her extremely conspicuous and inescapable need to understand how everything around her worked. The wonder on her face when she learned something new was so adorable that he had fulfilled her wish, fully expecting her to get frustrated and lose interest 5 minutes into her attempts to decipher the incredibly dry text. But she hadn't. Kazuhiro didn't think that was normal, but he admittedly hadn't spent time around anyone her age since he himself shared it. He was an only child, and a rather dull one at that. His friends in the academy weren't much smarter than he was, but he remembered those elite few at the top of his class. Especially Sasaki-chan, who stood head and shoulders over her peers and aced every trial with ease. She probably could have understood those texts. But could she have cast a jutsu at this age? He wouldn't be too surprised. Maybe this was within the realm of expectations for someone who, unlike himself, possessed natural talent. Okay, good. Then, Kazuhiro's face broke into a soft smile as he reached over to rest a hand on her head. He could imagine her at the top of her class, the object of adoration and envy. That it was his responsibility to raise someone like that, he suddenly felt a great weight on his shoulders. You're so cool, Imuto. You'll be an amazing kunoichi someday. She grinned, looking so much like her mother at that moment. Kazuhiro wasn't sure if he had ever seen Mana without that exact expression on her face, the few times he'd interacted with her. I think you deserve a treat for learning your first jutsu, he announced. What would you like? Something new. She cheered, and Kazuhiro laughed in bemusement. What a strange child. What kid ever wanted to try something new? A day after I finally learned the Chisana Hikari no Jutsu, I discovered that simply executing the technique was the easy part of Sexy Sensei's challenge. Maintaining it for 5 consecutive minutes was the hard part. Keeping focus and steadying the stream of chakra to my hand was like exhaling for an extended period of time while keeping the intensity of the air stream constant. It was easy at first, but grew exponentially more difficult as time passed. I was getting better at it, but I'm starting to suspect that it was an unreasonable goal to give an ordinary 3-year-old. Well, I did say I was going to be the best. If I wanted something easy, I shouldn't have talked so big. I practiced and practiced, neglecting all other projects in the face of my deadline. I didn't even socialize with the whale, though I wanted to teach him my new jutsu as a thank you for his contribution to the events that allowed me to learn it eventually. Once he grew up a little more, I might take him to the hospital to actually get a medical professional's opinion on the matter, just to be safe, as he surely didn't have the level of awareness over his chakra that I possessed. But when I finally managed to sustain the jutsu past the 3.5-minute mark, I began to have other difficulties. Those being my chakra reserves. I had overestimated their size, probably due to my own ego and the suggestion from fanfics that a reincarnated person's chakra was larger because they possessed an abundance of spiritual energy. I guess I also assumed that all my internal chakra manipulation worked to increase my reserves by a lot, for some reason. Apparently, I was wrong on all accounts. My level of focus went beyond what any normal child could be expected to muster, That was the only advantage I had brought to this life that had any relevance to the exercise. Scratch what I said earlier. This task wasn't just unreasonable for a 3-year-old, it was impossible. That bitch just didn't want to share her space with me. She was in for a shock then. I was going to pass her challenge, and I was going to resort to drastic matters to do it. My plans began with a dive into my Kaimon gate of view, which was responsible for signaling the body to create more chakra. I wasn't going to do something stupid like open the gate. Even if I was that much of a moron, I assumed the spandex duo were the only ones in the anime capable of doing so for a reason, but I was going to try and trick it, hopefully causing the organ to let out a false signal that would cause the body to produce more chakra even though I was already at full capacity. How am I going to do that? I have no idea. My plan was just to fiddle around in there until I found my answer. According to my medical textbook, the gate worked on an overflow system. It would take care of itself first before distributing its excess chakra to the rest of the body. So, to make sure it was topped off, I ate. A lot. So much so that I had a permanent stomach ache for days. Too full to do much of anything comfortably, I meditated, molding the chakra inside of me like a potter would clay, without letting any of it escape. Now that I knew my canals, coils was the correct term apparently, but I prefer my water metaphors, had a bit of resilience, I tried to expand them, manipulating my internal chakra to inflate them almost like a balloon. But carefully. As soon as I felt the slightest trace of pain, I would move on to another segment, focused around the gate of view. My thought process was that, if I increased the size of my canals around the gate, I could trick the organ into thinking I didn't have enough chakra, which would stimulate production. The plan was stupid and, in retrospect, it was obvious it wouldn't work. Attempting to trick the system ended in failure, so next I tried to work within it. I scoured the medical text Kazuhiro gifted me, trying to find what factors caused the gate to signal for the increased production of chakra. I found frustratingly little, but there were a couple of gems hidden within the text that was otherwise drier than Suna. The gate of view had canals leading directly to 9 tenketsu aside from the other gates. Which was cool because, unlike the gates, I could actually manipulate those. Allegedly, there was some degree of communication between these tenketsu and the gate, observed in a study I bet had been conducted in Konoha and stolen by a spy. Though the study itself was convoluted, it suggested that, to an extent, the gate used these tenketsu as a sort of antenna to gauge the body's overall chakra level. So, theoretically, if I could move the chakra out of them, the gate might think I was near the point of chakra exhaustion and increase production. Something that was a lot easier said than done. I doubted that emptying just one tenketsu would be enough. I would have to do multiple, perhaps even all 9 of them. To make matters worse, they were all spread evenly through my torso, which might as well have been an entire ocean as far as my little submarine was concerned. I devoted the rest of the day to figuring out how to do just one. I clenched a tenketsu right underneath my ribs, referred to as Tenketsu 65, and tried to direct my chakra. Strangely, it didn't want to go further into my chakra network. It wanted to push through the barrier of my skin altogether. I think this was due to the orientation of the organ. It was like a valve that accepted a substance from 2 sources, but released it in a single, different direction. But I didn't want to release the chakra outside of my body. That would be a waste, and counterproductive if I wanted to amass chakra. My submarines were proof that I could potentially coax chakra back into my body and through the canals. Only, there was a big difference between making a simple ripple in a pool and squeegeeing all the water into another place entirely. It felt unnatural and intense. The chakra didn't want to cooperate, and if my concentration lapsed, I would lose hold of it immediately. And of course, keeping the chakra away from the tenketsu was almost as difficult as getting it out in the first place. I persevered nonetheless, but just before I finally managed it, I was shaken out of my trance by Akane Basin, who proclaimed that it was time for dinner. Annoyed with myself as much as I was with her, I grudgingly forced myself to eat copious amounts of the roast she served. Mindful eating was usually a technique used to control excessive eating, but I used it now to consume more, focusing on the taste rather than the discomfort in my belly. Getting this technique, which might not even produce my desired end result, down would take all of the time I had left. I would effectively be putting all of my eggs in the basket. Well, when in shonen, do as the shonens do. I waved off Akane Basin's concern. I had barely said 3 sentences since I realized how unfair Sexy Sensei's challenge was, and left for an early night. A year ago, I had upgraded to my own room, which I still hadn't gotten around to decorating. My bed was a lot bigger than it needed to be for my size, not that I complained, and there were heavy-duty blackout curtains that stifled every last ray of the morning sun. I didn't actually fall asleep. Instead, like I had the last few nights, I meditated into the wee hours of dawn, finally forcing and keeping most of my chakra away from the tenketsu. It felt uncomfortable, almost like a loss of circulation. Then I realized my chakra, in the segment of the canal connecting Tenketsu 65 to the gate of view, was getting backed up. Hurriedly, I dropped the technique before something important could explode. Well, that's a problem. The solution wasn't to halt the flow of chakra to and from a Tenketsu, and I was an idiot for ever thinking it was. But my experience taught me a valuable skill, which was the ability to use my Tenketsu to force chakra back through my canals, something I would later find most people couldn't do. It also led me to my next solution, which was to simply force my chakra through the Tenketsu and into the other parts of my body more quickly, keeping the organ in a constant state of depletion. That was rather dangerous as well, but I had already developed my submarine splitting technique, which greatly cut down on the chance of catastrophic failure. And if any canals did get backed up, they would be the much less important ones located in my extremities. I took great satisfaction in that win, even though it wasn't exactly intentional. And fuck, it wasn't even difficult. At first. But then I added more Tenketsu, and then the challenge really took off. Unlike with my previous attempts, however, I was steadily making progress. While actively pumping chakra away from my gate, my limbs felt tight and inflated, as if someone had given me a blood transfusion but pumped me up with too much extra fluid. It was extremely uncomfortable, and I knew I was on the precipice of blowing off all my limbs. But holy shit, it was working. After an extended session, which I privately called putting on the jets, as my canals alarmingly felt like jacuzzi nozzles, I still felt a bit of that tightness after I let up, which I took to mean that I had more chakra than when I began. I'm not a complete idiot. To make absolutely certain I hadn't majorly fucked up, I went to the hospital and got an examination. The medic Mean was baffled. She clearly has an excess of chakra, she told Kazuhiro, and I almost let out a cheer of excitement. Has she had an unusual appetite as of late? Oh cool. I was being examined for a dysfunction in my gate of view. Strange thing to be excited about recognizing, but I guess it just feels nice to know things. She has been eating a lot, Kazuhiro mused. The medic Mean's hand glowed, and she hovered it over my stomach. There are micro tears in her Keimon, an important Tenketsu. It looks to be on the mend, but I'll heal them just in case. Who? Go lady. One less thing I have to worry about. I couldn't see the organ itself, just measure my internal chakra, so I hadn't even noticed the strain. How can you tell? I asked, and she cocked an eyebrow at me. She probably wasn't used to people showing curiosity in her art. My medical jutsu, she replied, and realized she probably just thought I was stupid. I mean, obviously, I said, my face pink. I meant, how does your jutsu work? Do you feel the injuries in some way? In a sense. Different injuries bear different textures. It's somewhat akin to rolling a ball over an uneven surface. You can feel what's underneath, even though you aren't touching it directly. How I know what texture corresponds to what injury, that's a matter of exposure, combined with an intimate understanding of human anatomy. Do you have an interest in medicine? Interest was a strong word, but it could certainly come in handy. Especially since I was committed to messing around with my internals. Maybe field medicine, but I can't imagine myself working in a hospital, I replied, and she gave a considering hum. I wonder if she would have shared more tips with me if I had just lied and told her my dream was to become a world-class medic. If the discomfort is too much, I can teach you to drain your chakra, she offered, moving back to the subject of our visit. Nope, I said quickly. I mean, I can do it myself. I demonstrated my jutsu, and the woman's eyes widened. Oh my, she said, clearly taken aback. Well, yes, that would work. But it's not very uncomfortable, I lied, canceling the jutsu quickly to conserve chakra. What would happen if I just left it? If you can bear the sensation, I suspect only good things for an aspiring kunoichi, the medic said, and I could barely rein in my reaction. The excess, as long as it doesn't build up too far, will slowly stretch your pathways, making them larger and increasing your chakra capacity in the long run. Something that's far easier and safer to do at your age, while your body is so malleable. This degree of sudden expansion later in life could cause tears in the lining too big and too numerous to heal before your body suffers critical failure. Ah, yes. The words every patient wants to hear in a doctor's office. Critical failure. How will I know if the problem gets too bad? I asked immediately. Oh, you'll know, she said ominously. If you feel extreme pain, return at once. Although, I don't think you have to worry. Your Keimon had already halted its unusual stimulation of chakra by the time I examined you, so unless there's another dysfunction of some kind, you won't experience another surge of chakra like this again. That's what you think. But I didn't like the idea of waiting until it was too late to diagnose myself. Some limits shouldn't be crossed, and I needed to find out where mine lay. What was the jutsu this medic was using? Some kind of diagnostic technique? I'd have to look and see if there are any instructions on using it in my texts. I have a question, I asked. If this is such a rare and beneficial thing, why don't medics like yourself try and induce it in shinobi? Healing with medical ninjutsu requires impeccable control and a precision that cannot be matched in any other discipline, she lectured. I highly doubt a medic that skilled exists anywhere in the elemental nations. And also, the Keimon isn't an ordinary tenketsu. If it is not treated with the appropriate delicacy, the patient might face devastating consequences. You are very fortunate that your injury occurred at your age, and that the consequences are to your benefit. People with similar afflictions have not been nearly so lucky. I really wanted to brag about how luck had nothing, well, not much, to do with it, but I held my tongue. Kazuhiro might restrict my freedoms in the future, and frankly, he would be right to. If I, as an adult, heard about a child doing something so outrageous, I would consider it my moral duty to put a stop to it. Or worse, I could be forced into some lab somewhere instead of being allowed to join the shinobi ranks. That would suck. Do you know when my chakra network will adjust? I asked, but she shook her head. There's no way of knowing for sure. Just listen to your body. Slowly, the sensation will go away. Hopefully, not too slowly. I don't know how long I'm capable of powering the Chisana Hikari no Jutsu with my current reserves, so I'd much rather be safe than sorry. So, over the next couple of days, I manually topped off my reserves, keeping my pathways tight and just shy of bursting. It really, really sucked. I couldn't wait for my week to be up. And not soon enough, it was. Endo Ayuma stared down at the little girl, who had been waiting for her team to arrive, leaning against the wall of the tunnel. She looked nonchalant, but the Jonin hadn't earned the moniker Unfollowable Ayuma for nothing. She was both an excellent censor and a near-peerless judge of body language. The girl was slightly nervous, but that was overshadowed by her excitement. I hope you haven't come to waste my time, Ayuma asked, just to see what she'd say or do. She felt that a person showed their true character when frightened, so that was the emotion she usually tried to elicit. I hope so too, she said, her voice cheerful despite its throatiness, and Ayuma blinked at the unexpected response. Your words imply uncertainty, but your tone doesn't match, she noted. You better be taking this seriously. Oh, you have no idea how seriously I'm taking this, she said, her grin turning a bit savage. Curious. But for your information, I learned how to perform the jutsu within 24 hours of you teaching it to me. However, I've never actually tested how long I am able to hold it. Then you're not taking this seriously, Ayuma said, a dangerous look creeping over her face that had her quietly watching students edge backwards unconsciously. Though that might have had more to do with the wisps of killing intent that she let off. The girl wet her lips, but that was the only indication she felt it at all. I didn't think I'd be able to hold it for 5 minutes, she admitted. At first. So I developed a technique to ensure that I could. There was no technique that could increase a person's chakra capacity in such a short time, or one that would allow someone to replenish chakra without the assistance of a skilled medic nin, so Ayuma's expression grew even more frosty. I would have told you soldier pills were against the rules if I thought you would be stupid enough to use them, she warned. The pills were the only explanation she could think of that would replicate such a feat, and they wreaked havoc on a user's body. As such, they should only be used as a last resort. If a 3-year-old were to use one, they would probably suffer immediate kidney failure. No soldier pills, she promised. But I won't keep the both of us in suspense any longer. She molded the hand seals and a light emanated from her palm as she raised it towards the roof of the cave. And the time starts now. They waited. And waited. And waited. The only sound in the tunnels was from her own brats, who shuffled their feet in impatience. As a censor, Ayuma was more familiar than most with how much chakra a person of a specific demographic should have. Which was how she knew that someone of this kid's age, even if their parents were absolute chakra monsters, shouldn't be able to hold the jutsu past the 4-minute mark, and that was purely from a chakra capacity standpoint. There was the skill component as well to consider. However, that 4 minutes came and went, and the light didn't so much as flicker. Then, it was over. Your 5 minutes are up, the Jonin announced, not even needing to count the seconds. Cool, the girl said. But she didn't let her arm drop, or let the light extinguish. Obviously, the kid wanted to prove a point. Immature and slightly obnoxious as it was, Ayuma decided not to interrupt her, mostly out of her own piqued curiosity. She hadn't cared enough to look at the kid's chakra before, but now Ayuma extended her sixth sense to the girl. It was only due to her extensive conditioning with the red ogres that allowed her to keep the surprise out of her posture. The girl wasn't putting up a front. She really did have plenty of chakra left. But even stranger were the irregular movements of her chakra. When a jutsu was formed, it usually exited a single or localized group of tenketsu. Chakra for that jutsu would flow to that tenketsu to be used up in the process, and if the jutsu was sustained for a period of time, chakra from farther parts of the body would have to be sucked towards the tenketsu as a vacuum was formed within the chakra network. This was the reason that sustaining jutsu was so hard. Eventually, the chakra nearest to the tenketsu would be used up more quickly than it could be replenished, leaving a void that caused the jutsu to fail, damaging the user's body in the process. However, the girl's chakra network seemed to be doing the opposite. Instead of using up the chakra nearest to the tenketsu on her hand, it was siphoning the extra chakra in her legs first, and at an impressive rate. No void was being formed in the slightest. "Are you doing that consciously?" Ayuma asked. "What do you mean?" "With your chakra," she clarified, and the girl raised an eyebrow. "Shit. You're a sensor, aren't you?" "Answer the question," Ayuma ordered, and the girl sighed. "I am," she said. Her arm was trembling from being held up for so long. "All my preparation was focused on bolstering my chakra reserves, and I didn't even realize there was another part of the puzzle. Good thing I can improvise. Otherwise, my light may have gone out a while ago." She grinned, and not in a nice way. "Sneaky sensei? I wasn't supposed to pass this test, was I?" "I already have 3 snot-nosed brats that I have to keep from drowning," Ayuma said, unashamedly. The 3 brats in question didn't say anything, but she could feel their agitation from the comment. "I didn't want to have to concern myself with another. But if someone else walked in on you splashing about in a restricted training area, they may not have been as forgiving as me." "So you're saying you did this out of the kindness of your heart?" she teased, and Ayuma snorted, not deigning to comment on that. "You said you focused on bolstering your chakra reserves," she recalled. "How did you increase them in such a short span of time?" The girl seemed to consider the question. "It's not unrelated to this other thing I'm doing," she finally said. "I have extremely good chakra control. It's part that, part eating a lot and part meditation. I doubt anyone other than me can produce the same results." The light still wasn't out, and they were well past the 8-minute mark. "Who are your parents?" Ayuma asked. "My mother was Amori Mana," she said. "And my father was Imai Hisashi. They're dead." Ayuma vaguely recognized the father's name. He was listed as a B-rank threat, once upon a time. Maybe her reserves were naturally larger than average. Perhaps she even had a hidden bloodline. "Are you in the care of the orphanage?" she asked, keeping the sympathy out of her voice. No self-respecting IWA shinobi, prospective or official, would appreciate that. "No, my godbrother takes care of me." She nodded sharply. "What do you think about entering the academy early?" The girl's face lit up, even under the strain of maintaining her technique. A child joined the academy at 5, typically, though some were a bit older depending on what month their birthdays fell. 3 is still too young even after this, she said, waving her hand. But to enter the academy early, you need a jonin sponsor. When you turn 4, I would be willing to act as one. I would love nothing more, she said quickly, and the jonin narrowed her eyes. This decision isn't one that you should make so casually. It would be prudent for you to think it over. What's there to think over? The girl asked, confused. I'm going to be a shinobi. If you're offering to sponsor me, I assume you must think I'm ready now, and I'm nearing the limit of my self-study. I know I'll be behind the other kids in terms of growth, but... It seems you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what the academy entails, Ayuma interrupted. There are no kids in the academy. There are only shinobi in training, and you will be treated as such. In every way that matters, your childhood will end the moment you step through its gate. IWA does not coddle her shinobi, and by choosing to enroll early, you will receive even less sympathy. I'm not looking to be coddled, the girl insisted, flexing her fingers so hard they cracked on their own. I'm actually quite sick of being treated my age. No, she didn't understand. Once you declare your intent to become a shinobi in an official capacity, Ayuma said seriously, you will take upon yourself great responsibility. The choices you make will cease to impact solely yourself. If, for example, you break your arm outside of class, training, playing, it doesn't matter. That will be viewed as the sabotage of an Iwadakure asset, and you will face proportionate consequences. You will live solely for the good of the village. Can you bear that weight as you are now? Or would you prefer to delay it for another year and remain a child? At least she seemed to be treating the decision with the weight it deserved, now. Talk it over with your brother, Ayumu insisted. Hear what he has to say on the matter. At just over 10 minutes, the lights sputtered out, and the girl cursed. Thanks for the offer, sensei, she said, shaking out her hand. She looked a bit clammy. I'll talk to my Nai-san about it. For now, though, I don't think I'm up for swimming. I'll see you next week. As she turned, Ayumu spoke up. I'm already reserving this place for 1.5 hours. I might as well round it up to 2, so you can come a half hour early in the future. The girl nodded and continued limping out of the cave. That was very nice of you, sensei, Suichi, one of her students, noted. Nice wasn't exactly the correct word, in Ayumu's opinion, but she wasn't concerned about the semantics. I'm just doing my duty as an IWA shinobi to nurture talent, she replied. It wasn't something she did often or lightly, especially if she wasn't getting paid for it. However, Ayuma's gut told her one thing: that child had the mental fortitude and the skill to be someone, someday. And it was never a bad idea to have a person like that in her debt. Ow. Ow. Motherfucking ow. The tightness in my chakra pathways was gone, but in its place was an even deeper ache that pulsed through my entire being. The processes that led to an increase in chakra capacity were supposed to be gradual, but now my canals were like rubber bands that had been stretched over something a bit too big for too long. Once the object was removed, they were permanently bigger, looser, and fatigued. I needed a medicine. No, wait, I needed more chakra first. Not nearly as much as before, but enough to add some tension to my canals. For that, I needed to eat and meditate, so that was the first thing I did. I crammed as much meat into my mouth as I could, and as I was in the process of making a slob out of myself, Kazuhiro walked in. Lo, Nisan, I said, a mouth full of food. You're back from your mission? He stared at me, a complex emotion in his face as I tried to wipe my own off properly with a napkin. I got back yesterday evening, he said finally. I came in to see you, but you were dissociating. I thought you were seriously ill. Nothing I said got through to you. I would have taken you to the hospital, but Obasan said that this was normal for you over the last couple days. She said you'd be fine in the morning? Now I feel bad. He looked really concerned. I'm sorry, Nai-san, I apologized. I won't do that again. It's just that, healing from the chakra thing was really uncomfortable. But I think I'm better now. Well, not better, I hedged. I think I just got over a stage last night. Now I just feel sore all over, but in a very different way. Do you need a medic? He asked. Maybe. I'll try and stick it out, I said. If I admitted I needed one, he would insist on taking me right away, and I needed to do some finagling with my internals first. I feel bad for bothering them so much. Are you sure? He pressed. I promise I'll tell you if I really need it. Then, softer, I said, sorry for making you and Akane-Obasan worry. He ruffled my hair. It's okay, Emuto. We know you were sick. But I wasn't sick. I chose to do this, and chose to push my family away in the process, so I kinda felt like a piece of shit. I wasn't used to having family that cared wasn't the right word. If something was really wrong, to the point that I approached them over it, my last family might try to solve the issue, if it wasn't stupid. But if I didn't, I'd be given space until I took care of it myself. Then I'd be received as if my period of reclusiveness had never happened. Having a brother who actually gave a shit, it was new. I wasn't yet accustomed to it, but at the same time, I didn't quite hate it. I need to take a nap, I told Kazuhiro. It was hard to sleep last night. But after that, do you want to do something? He smiled gently. Yeah, he said. I would like that. Do something was incredibly vague, but we settled on eating out at a yakiniku place. Out of all the food I tried in this new life, those delectable meat skewers were probably my favorite. Nisan, I said between voracious bites. What's the academy like? Sexy Sensei's warning was somewhat jarring. My childhood would end, full stop. I would be treated solely as an asset of Iwagakure? Surely that was an exaggeration, right? The academy? He repeated, screwing up his expression as he tried to decide how to best answer the question. The academy was difficult. He said it in a way that implied his true thoughts on the matter were far harsher. Not really what I wanted to hear. You hated it, I surmised. I did not hate it, he lied. There were some parts that were tolerable. I made many close friends, of course, they all died. Oof. I hated how cavalierly he said that. However, I must admit, my life did get somewhat easier once I graduated into the Genin Corps. Being in the academy is harder than being a full-fledged ninja, I clarified, because what the fuck? No, I wouldn't say that, he told me, quickly. The war front was definitely more stressful, and most of the time more physically difficult. I only meant that, once I graduated, things became far less strict. I didn't have to compete with anyone. I didn't have superiors breathing down my neck at all times. Ueo told me that, if you break your arm outside of class, you'll get punished for it, I said softly. Well, of course. The skills they teach you can be easily misused. You could hurt yourself and others with them quite seriously. Anyone who does that should face repercussions. He said that you'd get in trouble, even if you were just playing, I pressed. Without using ninja skills. There was an implied question in the statement that he couldn't willfully ignore. I think at some level, he realized that this was an important conversation to me that spanned further than the academy. There is something that every IWA shinobi should know, he stated, sitting up straighter. It's called the Will of Stone. Like the Will of Fire? Did every major village have its own special dogma? I wonder which one came first? Stones at the base are what makes a mountain strong, he declared. Everyone is important, and that means everyone shares responsibility. Any act that threatens the stability of the structure is, well, inexcusable. Think about it this way. If you injure yourself, and that injury gets aggravated later on in combat, you could put yourself, your comrades, and your mission in jeopardy. Once you begin to walk the path of shinobi, you become part of something bigger than yourself. Everything you do must be for the good of IWA. It was a lot of pressure to put on a child, but though Kazuhiro wasn't a particularly good orator, even I couldn't help but feel a little inspired. If I didn't have an entire lifetime of past memories, I might have fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. Just as he clearly had. Don't worry about the academy, Emuto, he said with what was supposed to be a reassuring smile. I'm 100% certain that you won't have the same trouble with it as I had. In fact, I bet our experiences will be completely different altogether. I was never very bright, or a good student. I could never meet my sensei's expectations. You will surpass them, I'm sure of it. If I thought I was anime protagonist enough to escape the consequences of my little stunt scot-free, I was very wrong. I had increased my chakra capacity by a significant amount, but not the reserves themselves, bar conscious effort, or my chakra regeneration rate. So now, the rest of my body had to play catch-up, which took months. The medics couldn't really do much for me either. Perhaps I had a faulty understanding of what medical ninjutsu was capable of, which was very likely, or Iwa's medical division was just shit. I was leaning towards the first. The medics I'd encountered seemed competent, and everything canon about medic ninjutsu that I knew came from the lips of Tsunade, who was a peerless prodigy at the art. It wasn't fair to hold others to her standard. All they could really do was give me pain meds. Which I gratefully accepted, don't get me wrong, but I was hoping to just be, healed. Turns out I wouldn't be able to spam this strategy until I got Kisame-leveled chakra reserves, though it might get me close if I kept with it. I would definitely have to dial back the intensity, however, and increase the time frame by several magnitudes. But I was incredibly satisfied with the result. Once a week, not as much as I would like but better than nothing, I could get my swimming fix, and I could even fuck around for half an hour before Sexy Sensei and her squad got there and I had to pretend to get serious. Akaneo Basin was used to me going off on my own during the day. IWA thankfully wasn't like in my old world where young children needed to be hovered over at all hours of the day. Kazuhiro was frequently off on missions, so I either noticed. Once my chakra had settled into something more resembling normalcy, I started on another project, one that had haunted my fantasies ever since I first learned about the gates. My first step was achieving mastery of the Chisana Hikari no Jutsu, Little Light technique. I practiced it at all hours of the day, paying close attention to the behavior of my chakra as I used it. As an unintended side effect, I gained the ability to use it on my opposite hand as well, though it couldn't be transferred to any other area as the jutsu was created to be used with the chakra network in a person's hand. Not long after, I was comfortable enough with the jutsu to sequester the exact amount of chakra it required to be sustained for a minute in my hand, meaning it would cut off on its own after a minute of activation. I repeated it over and over until my precision was exact. Then I began to laugh, as I had just invented a unit of measuring chakra. A Hikari, I named it. The amount of chakra it takes to maintain a lesser chakra light for a minute. I wasted no time in measuring my gates, once I figured out how. By their very nature, they sat closed and disconnected from the largest canals. However, that only kept chakra from getting out. Each gate was still fed through inward-flowing tributaries, the largest of which I could slip a submarine through. It took many attempts to be able to sustain each submarine long enough to get a comprehensive reading, Due in part to the behavior of my chakra work, there weren't many tenketsu inside my tenketsu to pulse, and the gate itself was beyond my control, and the shape of the gates themselves. Some, like the Simon and Kaimon, even had multiple, connected ventricles that made the exercise even trickier. However, I succeeded in the end. Kaimon Logic, 13.5. Kumon Creativity, 14. Simon Production, 18. Shaman Chakra Affinity, 2. Taman Strength, 4. Kaimon Young Production, 16.5. Kaiman Speed, 4.5. I rounded to the nearest half number for simplicity. From what my medical book suggested, the chakra contained within the gates boosted the associated trait, not simply dictated them. Meaning that the number of hikaris present in each gate was more like a stat multiplier than a stat itself. Although, the actual trait conversely influenced the amount of chakra as well. For example, a higher brain activity in the left hemisphere would lead the body to allocate more chakra to the gate of opening. It wasn't surprising that my advanced cognition had fed into my Kaimon and Kumon, but I was surprised at how disproportionate they were compared to my other stats. Except for my Kaimon and Simon, which were rather staggering. But taking into account the nature of the gates in question, I probably shouldn't be surprised. Their primary function was to house physical and spiritual energy respectively until it needed to be merged and distributed, after all. So the amount of chakra they contain probably shouldn't be compared to the amount present in other gates. Out of curiosity, I also measured the Shimon, the gate of death. I didn't think it could offer me anything, and I was too scared to even tamper with it at all, but I was curious about its capacity. Shimon Death, 21.5. That's how much chakra it took to run my heart for some reason, even though humans and animals in my old world got along just fine without any mystical energy. Maybe that chakra had some hidden purpose. If I was ever in a position to speak civilly with Tsunade about it, as if that could ever happen, I would. I also sorely wished I could look at other people's stats for reference, but that was similarly impossible. I wasn't a censor, I couldn't manipulate another person's chakra, and I certainly couldn't spread my awareness to another person's chakra network. Which meant I had no one to compare myself to. But that was okay. If I had that capability, I might settle for simply being better than anyone else my age, something I couldn't afford to do if I wanted to survive in this world. Now, the only person I was sure I could surpass was myself, and I enjoyed watching those numbers go up ever so slowly as I continued the grind. The only one that remained completely stagnant was my already lowest stat, the Shaman. I had no idea what to do about that, as I didn't even know what my elemental affinity was, much less how to develop it. While I desperately wished for it to be water, I knew deep in my heart that it was either earth or wind. Those were the affinities my parents possessed, Doton for my father, and Futon for my mother, according to the Shinobi Registrar entry Kazuhiro requisitioned for me, and this kind of thing usually boiled down to genetics. But maybe my past life experiences would come out on top, who knows?